I need $600,000 by tomorrow, my daughter screamed, slamming a thick stack of legal notices onto my kitchen table with enough force to rattle the coffee cups. Or Brad goes to jail. Her husband, a man I had never trusted, leaned against my doorframe with a smirk that made my blood run cold. "Sell the house, old man," he said, casually checking his expensive watch. "You do not need it anyway. You are 1 foot in the grave as it is." I looked at them, at the daughter I had raised and the parasite she had married, and I smiled a slow, cold smile. "Okay," I said. 5 hours later, I was sitting in a first-class seat on a flight to Tokyo sipping champagne. When they broke into my empty house the next morning looking for the money, all they found was a closed door and a cardboard box sitting in the middle of the living room. And when they opened it, their screams were loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. I am Malik Thompson, 70 years old, and for decades I let my family believe I was just a retired draftsman living on a modest pension. They did not know I was the silent architect behind 5 of Chicago's tallest skyscrapers. They did not know about the millions sitting in offshore accounts. But before I tell you what was in that box, please like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. The morning my life changed forever started with violence. Not physical violence, but the violence of disrespect. I was sitting at my kitchen table in the 4-bedroom house in the historic district where I had lived for 40 years. It was the house my late wife Etta and I had bought with her nursing wages and my first few paychecks. It was a home filled with the smell of old books and lemon polish. But that morning, the air smelled of expensive cologne and desperation. Nia did not knock. She still had a key, a privilege I should have revoked years ago. She stormed into the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors like the ticking of a bomb. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about my health. She simply threw the papers down. The heavy thud echoed in the silence of the house. "I need the money tomorrow, Dad," she ordered. Her voice was not the voice of the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders to see the parades. It was the voice of a stranger, cold and entitled. I picked up the papers. My hands were steady. I have built bridges that can withstand hurricanes. I could certainly withstand a tantrum from a spoiled child. I adjusted my glasses and read the top document. It was a restitution order from a federal court. $600,000. It was not a mortgage. It was not a medical bill. It was the price of freedom. Embezzlement. Securities fraud. Brad finally walked into the room. He is a tall white man with a smile that he uses like a weapon. He works or used to work as a stockbroker. He always looked at my house with a sneer as if the neighborhood was beneath him, even though his car was leased and his suits were bought on credit. He walked over to the counter and picked up an apple, taking a bite without asking. "Do not look so shocked," Malik, Brad said, chewing loudly. "It is a simple liquidity issue. I moved some client funds around to cover a margin call and the market turned against me. It happens. But now the firm is threatening to go to the FBI if I do not replace the capital by close of business tomorrow." He spoke about stealing over $500,000 as if he had simply forgotten to return a library book. "And you expect me to have that kind of money?" I asked, keeping my voice low and even. "You think a retired draftsman has $600,000 lying around in a cookie jar?" Nia rolled her eyes. "We know you do not have the cash, Dad. But you have this house. We had it appraised last week behind your back. In this market, with the gentrification happening in the district, it is worth exactly $650,000. You sell it to one of those cash for homes investors today, and you give us the money." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face impassive. They had appraised my home, my sanctuary, without my permission. They had already calculated the value of my memories and decided they were worth less than Brad's freedom. "And where would I live?" I asked, looking at my daughter. Nia waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, we will find you a nice little apartment somewhere, or a facility. Brad says there are some very affordable state-run nursing homes nearby. You are getting too old to manage this place anyway. The stairs are bad for your knees." The cruelty was breathtaking. They were not asking for help. They were evicting me. They were telling me that my life as an independent man was over, and that my only remaining purpose was to be liquidated to cover their mistakes. Brad stepped closer, invading my personal space. He towered over me, trying to use his height to intimidate. "Listen, old man, let us not make this difficult. If I go to prison, Nia and your grandson Leo end up on the street. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason Leo grows up without a father because you wanted to hold on to a pile of bricks and wood? He knew exactly where to strike. Leo was my weak point. My grandson was the only innocent thing in this entire mess. But as I looked at Brad, I saw something else in the stack of papers. I saw a loan application from 3 years ago. It was for a business loan that had defaulted. And at the bottom of the page next to Brad's signature was another signature, Malik Thompson. I had never signed that document. I looked closer. It was a clumsy forgery, but it had been enough to get the loan. They had been using my name, using my credit, using my identity to fund their lifestyle for years. And now that the hole was too deep to dig out of, they wanted the house too. My blood boiled. It was a hot, sharp rage that I had not felt since the days of the civil rights movement when I had to fight just to walk through the front door of an architecture firm. But I did not shout. I did not throw them out. I learned a long time ago that silence is a weapon. If you stay quiet, your enemy will fill the silence with their own arrogance. I looked at the picture of Etta on the mantel. She would have been heartbroken to see what our daughter had become, but she also would have told me to protect myself. I looked around the kitchen at the table where we had shared thousands of meals. They saw an asset. I saw a life. But they did not know who I really was. They did not know that the dusty old man sitting in the cardigan was the architect, a man whose designs had reshaped skylines. They did not know that the house was just a fraction of what I owned. They did not know that I could write a check for $600,000 right now and not even notice it missing from my account. But I was not going to write that check. Not for them. Not for this. I looked up at Brad, who was now leaning casually against the counter, looking at his phone, probably texting his mistress. I knew about her too. I had hired a private investigator 2 weeks ago when I noticed some strange withdrawals from a joint account I had with Nia. The report was sitting in my locked study upstairs. Brad called me the stingy old slur in his texts to her. He promised her that once I kicked the bucket, they would be rich. Well, I was not planning on kicking the bucket anytime soon. I stood up slowly, feigning the frailty they expected. My knees popped. I let out a heavy sigh, the sound of a beaten man. "Okay," I said softly. Nia blinked, surprised by the sudden capitulation. "Okay, you will do it." "Yes," I said. "I cannot let Leo's father go to prison. I will sell the house. I have a contact at the bank. I can get a bridge loan against the equity by tomorrow morning while we process the sale." Brad clapped his hands together, a loud, wet sound. Boom. "See, Nia, I told you. You just have to be firm with him. He knows what is good for him." He looked at me with a triumphant sneer. "Good choice, Malik. You can sleep on our couch for a few days until we find you a room and a home. Just make sure the money is in my account by noon tomorrow. Do not make me come back here and get angry. I will go get the deed," I said, turning toward my study. "Make it quick," Nia called out. "And do not try anything funny, Dad." We checked. You cannot transfer the title without a notary, and Brad has one on speed dial. I walked into my study and closed the door. I leaned against the heavy oak wood and took a deep breath. The trembling in my hands stopped. The sadness in my heart was replaced by a cold steel resolve. They wanted the money. They wanted the house. They wanted to erase me. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a copy of Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Behind it was a small safe. I spun the dial. Inside was not the deed to the house. Inside was a black passport, a burner phone, and a ledger containing the access codes to my trust funds in the Cayman Islands. I took the burner phone and dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. "Clarence," I said when the voice on the other end answered. "It is Malik. Activate the Omega Protocol." "Yes." "Today. Sell everything in the domestic portfolio. Transfer the liquid assets to the Tokyo Trust. And Clarence, initiate the transfer of the deed for the house. Yes, the charity we discussed. The Veterans Housing Alliance. Give it to them for $1, effective immediately." I hung up the phone. I could hear Brad laughing in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, disrespecting my home. I opened the drawer of my desk and took out a simple cardboard box. I grabbed a marker and wrote on the lid, "For Nia and Brad. The $600,000 you need." Then I began to fill it, not with money, but with the truth. I walked back out into the kitchen holding a folder of documents that were actually just old blueprints folded over. "I will need to go to the bank personally to authorize the transfer," I told them. "It will take a few hours. You two should go home and pack. Get ready for your new life. We will wait here." Brad said, his eyes narrowing. No, I said firmly. The bank manager is an old friend. If you walk in there with me looking like a shark, he will ask questions. If you want the money fast, let me do it my way. Come back tomorrow morning at 8. The money will be here. Brad hesitated, then nodded. Fine. But if you are not here at 8 a.m. with a cashier's check, I am calling Adult Protective Services and telling them you are a danger to yourself. We will have you committed by lunchtime. I smiled. It was the most genuine smile I had given them in years because I knew something they did not. By 8 a.m. I would be crossing the international date line. See you tomorrow, I said. They left, slamming the front door. I watched them drive away in Brad's leased BMW. Then I locked the door. I did not pack a bag of clothes. I did not take the photo albums. I left everything exactly as it was. I wanted the house to look like a life interrupted. I placed the cardboard box in the center of the living room floor. I checked my watch. My Uber to the airport was 5 minutes away. I took one last look at the kitchen table where the debt notice still lay. $600,000. A cheap price to pay to find out exactly what your family thinks of you. I walked out the front door and locked it for the last time, dropping the key through the mail slot. I am Malik Thompson, and my disappearance was just beginning. I stood in the kitchen of the house I had built with my own hands, gripping the edge of the granite countertop until my knuckles turned the color of ash. The silence I had cultivated for years was gone, replaced by the blaring noise of the television in the living room. Brad had made himself comfortable. Too comfortable. Through the open doorway, I watched him kick off his loafers and hoist his feet onto the coffee table. My breath hitched in my throat. That table was not just a piece of furniture. It was a mahogany antique that Etta, my late wife, had inherited from her grandmother. It was the table where we had placed our first Christmas tree. It was the table where Naya had learned to walk, pulling herself up on its sturdy legs. Etta used to polish it every Sunday with lemon oil, treating it with a reverence reserved for holy artifacts. And now Brad was grinding the heels of his sweaty socks into the delicate wood grain, treating my history like a footrest. He grabbed the remote and surfed through the channels, settling on a football game. The volume was loud enough to shake the family photos on the walls, photos he had never looked at, photos that documented a legacy he was determined to liquidate. He didn't ask if I minded. He didn't ask if I was watching something. In his mind, I was already gone. I was just a ghost haunting a property he had already mentally sold. Then his phone rang. He answered it on the first ring, his voice booming with an unearned confidence. "Yo, Mike," he shouted over the roar of the crowd on the TV. "Yeah, I am at the in-laws, well, the soon-to-be former in-laws' house." I stood frozen by the sink, the water in the kettle growing cold. I should have walked in there. I should have knocked his feet off the table. I should have demanded he show some respect. But I stayed in the shadows, listening. Information is ammunition, and I was gathering a stockpile. "Yeah, it is done," Brad bragged, laughing a cruel, hacking laugh. "The old man is folding like a cheap lawn chair. I told you. You just have to lean on these people. They get scared easily. He thinks he is saving the family honor or some nonsense." He paused, listening to the person on the other end, and then smirked. "No, dude, you do not understand. The equity in this place is insane. This neighborhood is gentrifying fast. Once we kick him out and slap some gray paint on the walls, we are flipping this dump for $650, maybe $700,000. I pay off the firm and I still have enough left over to buy that boat we looked at." A boat. He was selling the sanctuary I built for my family to buy a boat. He lowered his voice slightly, but not enough. The arrogance made him careless. "Yeah, he is clueless. He thinks we are going to find him a nice apartment. Please." I grabbed some brochures for those state-funded nursing homes down on 8th Street. The ones that smell like bleach and boiled cabbage. We dump him there, tell him it is temporary, and let the system handle him. He won't last 6 months. My heart stopped, then restarted with a slow, thunderous rhythm. This was not just greed. This was an execution plan. He wasn't just taking my money. He was sentencing me to a slow death in a warehouse for the forgotten, all while he sailed on a lake with my money. I looked at the knife block on the counter. For a second, a terrible, violent second, I imagined walking into the living room and ending it. But that is what a foolish man would do. That is what a man with no options would do. I was neither. I was Malik Thompson, and I played the long game. Just then, Nia walked into the kitchen. She didn't look at me. She didn't offer to help with the coffee I was pretending to make. She walked straight to the fridge, opened it, and stared inside with a look of dissatisfaction. "We are out of oat milk, Dad," she said, her voice laced with an irritation that suggested this was a personal failure on my part. I looked at my daughter. I looked for the little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee, the teenager who promised she would always take care of me. She wasn't there. In her place was a woman who had watched her husband disrespect her mother's memory and said nothing. A woman who stood by while her husband planned to discard her father like trash. "I am sorry, Nia," I said, my voice steady. "I haven't been to the store." She huffed and slammed the fridge door shut. "Well, you need to stay on top of things. Just because you are selling the house doesn't mean you can stop functioning." She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time that day, but there was no warmth in her gaze, only calculation. "Dad, you need to hurry up with those papers," she said. "Brad is really stressed. His blood pressure is up. We cannot have any delays tomorrow." I looked toward the living room where Brad was cheering for a touchdown, looking anything but stressed. "I will get it done, Nia," I said. "It is a lot of paperwork. Giving up your life takes time." She rolled her eyes. "Stop being so dramatic. You are not giving up your life. You are downsizing. Honestly, Dad, look at this place. It is dusty. It is old. The plumbing rattles. It rattles because you keep flushing wipes down the toilet," I wanted to say. Instead, I remained silent. "You know," she continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed, patronizing tone that was even worse than her anger. "This is really for the best. You are 70 years old. Do you really need 4 bedrooms? Do you really need a yard? It is selfish, really. Holding on to all this space when Brad and I are struggling. Selfish." The word hung in the air between us. I had paid for her college. I had paid for her wedding. I had paid for her first car. I had quietly topped up her bank account whenever it got low for 10 years. And I was the selfish one. "The nursing home Brad found is actually really nice," she lied, avoiding my eyes. "They have activities. You can play checkers. You will have nurses to make sure you take your pills. It is better than rotting away in this big old museum. You will be happier there. You will be safer." That was the drop that made the cup overflow. It wasn't the theft. It wasn't the disrespect. It was the gaslighting. She was trying to convince me that locking me away was an act of love. She was trying to absolve herself of the guilt before the crime was even committed. "You think I belong in a nursing home, Nia?" I asked softly. She shrugged, picking at a loose thread on her designer sweater. "I think you belong somewhere where you are not a burden, Dad. We have our own lives. We cannot be worrying about you tripping over a rug every 5 minutes. We need the money, and you need care. It is a win-win. A win-win. She won the lottery, and I won a cell." I felt a cold clarity wash over me. The last thread of attachment, the last hope that she was just being manipulated, snapped. She wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator. She was willing to trade her father for a lifestyle she hadn't earned. "I understand, Nia," I said. "I truly understand." "Good," she said, checking her phone. "Now go get those papers ready. We want to be at the bank the second it opens." I turned my back on her. I walked out of the kitchen past the living room where Brad was still laughing at the TV, his feet still defiling Etta's table. I walked down the hallway, the floorboards creaking under my feet with a familiar sound that felt like a goodbye. I entered my study and locked the door. The click of the lock was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. I didn't go to the filing cabinet for the deed. I went to the bookshelf. I pulled out the hollowed-out volume of the encyclopedia. Inside sat the burner phone fully charged and waiting. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. I was calm. I was an architect, and I was about to demolish a condemned building. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice. "Clarence here," a deep, gravelly voice answered. "It is Malik," I said. There was a pause on the other end. Clarence Wright, my oldest friend, the man who had marched with me in Selma, the man who managed the fortunes of people who didn't want to be found, knew exactly what this call meant. "Is it time?" he asked. I looked at the photo of Etta on my desk. I looked at the closed door that separated me from the parasites in my living room. "It is time," I said. "Initiate the Omega Protocol. Scorched earth, Clarence. Leave them nothing. Not even the dust." I sat in the high-backed leather chair of my study, the only room in the house where the air still felt breathable. The heavy oak door was locked, a temporary barrier against the vultures circling in my kitchen. My hands, usually steady as a surgeon's, trembled slightly as I reached into the hollowed-out center of a vintage encyclopedia volume on the bottom shelf. It was a cliché hiding spot, but effective because neither Brad nor Nia had touched a book in this house since they learned to read. Inside was not just the burner phone I had used to call Clarence. There was a thick manila envelope, the kind that feels heavier than its contents should allow. It had arrived 3 days ago via courier, hand-delivered by Jameson, a private investigator I had known since he was a rookie cop walking the beat in my old neighborhood. I had not wanted to open it then. I had wanted to believe that my suspicions were just the paranoia of an old man who had seen too much of the world's ugliness. But now, with the demand for $600,000 hanging over my head like a guillotine, I needed to look. I needed to see the rot with my own eyes. I slid the glossy photographs out onto the mahogany desk. The first one was grainy, taken in low light, but the subject was unmistakable. It was Brad. He was sitting at a high-stakes poker table in a casino 2 hours north of here. He was not looking stressed. He was not looking like a man worried about federal prison. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a cigar clamped between his teeth, a stack of chips in front of him that represented more money than my father had earned in a lifetime. The timestamp on the photo was from 2 weeks ago. That was the night Nia had called me crying, saying Brad was working overtime to fix a clerical error at the firm. He wasn't fixing errors. He was gambling away their future. I shuffled to the next photo. This one was taken in daylight, crisp and clear. It showed Brad walking out of a luxury boutique in the city. He was not alone. Hanging on his arm was a woman who looked barely older than my granddaughter Leo would be in a few years. She was blonde, tall, and smiling up at him with the adoration that only money can buy. In Brad's hand was a bright orange shopping bag. Hermes. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I knew exactly how much a bag from that store cost. It cost $10,000 minimum. I pulled out the supplementary report Jameson had attached. He had traced the transaction. Brad had paid for that bag using a wire transfer from a joint retirement account, Nia's retirement account. The account I had helped her set up when she got her first job as a teacher. The account I had quietly matched contributions to for a decade so she would never have to worry when she got old. He had drained it. He had taken the safety net I built for my daughter and traded it for a leather purse for a mistress. I looked at the next document. It was a transcript of text messages intercepted from Brad's cloud account. Jameson was thorough. I read the words, and the last lingering ember of sympathy I held for my son-in-law turned to ash. "He will pay up," Brad had written to the woman. "The stingy old slur has the money buried in that house. I just have to scare him a little. Once he kicks the bucket, we are going to be living large baby. Just wait." The slur. He used the word. The word men like him had used against men like me for centuries. He sat at my table, ate my food, lived in the house my ancestors bled for, and behind my back I was just a slur to him, a piggy bank to be smashed open. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of old paper and lemon polish. The betrayal was absolute. But it was the next photo that broke me. It was a picture of Nia. She was sitting at a cafe with Brad looking at a document. The timestamp was from a month ago. She wasn't crying, she wasn't arguing, she was nodding, she was signing something. The caption in Jameson's report read, "Subject Nia Thompson co-signing on a second mortgage application for the primary residence application rejected due to lack of title." She knew. She knew about the debts. She might not have known about the mistress or the gambling, but she knew they were drowning, and she had tried to mortgage my home behind my back weeks ago. When the bank said no because my name was on the deed, they came up with this plan. The fake restitution order, the threat of jail. It was all a performance, a con. And my daughter was not a victim. She was the co-star. Suddenly a violent thud shook the door of the study. "Hey, old man!" Brad's voice boomed from the hallway, muffled by the thick wood but dripping with contempt. "Do not fall asleep in there. We do not have all day. Find the damn deed." I stared at the door. I imagined him standing there, arrogant, entitled, thinking he had already won. He thought I was in here fumbling through files, confused and terrified. He thought he was dealing with a frail old man who just wanted to keep the peace. He had no idea he was banging on the door of a man who had navigated the boardrooms of Tokyo and London, a man who had destroyed business rivals with a signature. I gathered the photos. I did not tear them up. I did not burn them. Evidence is power. I slid them back into the envelope and placed it inside the safe, locking it with a spin of the dial. I replaced the hollow book on the shelf. I stood up and walked to the mirror hanging on the wall. I looked at myself. I straightened my spine, which wanted to curve under the weight of the grief. Then deliberately I slumped my shoulders. I adjusted my glasses so they sat slightly askew. I practiced a look of defeat, a look of bewilderment. I unlocked the door and opened it. Brad was standing there, his fist raised to pound again. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my empty hands. "Well," he demanded, "did you find it?" I looked past him. Nia was standing at the end of the hallway. She had her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. She didn't look worried about her husband going to jail. She looked annoyed that the transaction was taking too long. She looked at me, her father, the man who had paid for her braces, her college, her wedding, and I saw nothing in her eyes but calculation. She wasn't being coerced. She wasn't a battered wife trying to save her husband. She was a partner in the crime. She had decided that my legacy was hers to spend, and she was tired of waiting for nature to take its course. "I am sorry," I said, my voice trembling with a manufactured frailty. "My filing system is a mess. My eyes are not what they used to be. I found the folder, but the deed is not in it. I must have moved it to the safety deposit box at the bank." Brad groaned, throwing his head back. "Jesus, Malik, you are useless. Do you know that?" "Useless." Nia walked up the hall, her expression hard. "Dad, focus. We need that paper. If we do not have the money by tomorrow, everything falls apart." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I searched for a trace of the daughter I loved, a hint of hesitation, a flicker of guilt. There was none. She was looking at me like I was a broken ATM. "I understand," I said softly. "I am sorry I am so slow. I will go to the bank. I will get it." "You better," Brad spat, "and hurry up. I am driving you. I do not trust you to find your way there without getting lost." I lowered my head, hiding the fire in my eyes. "That is fine," I said. "Drive me." I walked past them toward the front door, clutching my coat like a shield. They followed me, thinking they were marching a prisoner to his execution. They didn't know I was leading them into a minefield. The investigation was over, the verdict was in, and the sentence was going to be total and absolute devastation. I stood in the hallway, clutching the folder of meaningless blueprints to my chest as if it were a shield. My hands trembled not from age, but from a cocktail of rage and grief that threatened to stop my heart. Brad was revving the engine of his leased luxury sedan in the driveway, honking the horn with a rhythmic, impatient aggression that echoed through the neighborhood. But Nia was still standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching me with the cold, dead eyes of a shark, sensing blood in the water. "I am not sure about this, Nia," I said, my voice wavering. I looked down at the papers in my hand. "The bank might not accept a transfer this large without a waiting period. Maybe we should consult a lawyer. Maybe there is another way." I was stalling. I needed to see how far she would go. I needed to know if there was any scrap of my daughter left inside that woman, or if she had been completely hollowed out by greed. Nia sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. She stepped back inside the house and kicked the door shut, cutting off the sound of Brad's horn. The sudden silence was suffocating. "There is no other way, Dad," she hissed, stepping into my personal space. "We do not have time for lawyers. We do not have time for you to play the confused old man. We need the authorization signed now so that when we walk into the bank, the transfer is immediate." "But this is my home," I whispered, looking around at the walls I had painted, the floors I had laid. "If I sign this, I have nothing." "You have us," she said, but the words lacked any warmth. They sounded like a threat. I shook my head slowly. "I do not think I can do it, Nia. I cannot just sign away 40 years of my life on a kitchen counter because Brad made a mistake." "A mistake?" She laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "It was not a mistake. It was an opportunity that went wrong. And you are going to fix it because you owe us." "I owe you?" I asked. "Yes," she snapped. "You owe me for a childhood spent in this dusty, boring neighborhood while my friends were going to Europe. You owe me for being so emotionally distant after Mom died. You owe me because you have everything and we have nothing." I looked at her stunned. I had given her everything. I had been the one who held her when she cried over broken hearts. I had been the one who sat in the front row of every recital. "I am not signing," I said, finding a reserve of strength she did not expect, "not until I speak to a lawyer." Nia stared at me for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She did not call Brad. She opened a video chat app. I watched as she dialed a contact. The screen lit up. A moment later, a child's face appeared. It was Leo, my grandson. He was 5 years old, sitting in the living room of his paternal grandmother's house, holding a toy truck I had carved for him out of pine wood last Christmas. "Hi, Mommy," Leo chirped, his voice tinny through the phone speaker. "When are you coming to get me?" Nia turned the screen toward me, holding it just out of my reach. She put on a mask. Her face softened. Her voice became high and sweet, a sickening performance of maternal affection. "Hi, baby," she cooed. "Mommy misses you so much. I wanted to come get you today. I wanted to bring you to Grandpa's house so you could play in the yard." Leo's face lit up. "Is Grandpa there? Can I see him?" "Hi, Grandpa." I stepped forward, my heart lurching. "Hi, Leo," I started to say, reaching out to touch the screen. Nia pulled the phone back sharply. "I am sorry, baby," she said to the boy. Her eyes locked on mine with a terrifying intensity. "We cannot go to Grandpa's house anymore." Leo's smile faltered. "Why, Mommy?" "Because Grandpa does not want us there," Nia said, her voice trembling with fake sorrow. "Grandpa is very angry with Daddy and me. He is throwing us out of our house, Leo. He does not want to help us. He says we are a burden." "No," I gasped. "Nia, stop. Do not do this." On the screen, Leo's lip began to tremble. "Grandpa is mean," he asked, his voice small and scared. Nia nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Yes, baby. Grandpa does not love us anymore. He is choosing his money over us. We might have to sleep in the car tonight because Grandpa won't help Daddy." Leo started to cry. It was a high, keening wail that tore through me like a physical blow. "Grandpa, please," he sobbed through the pixels. "Please do not be mean to Mommy. Please let us come home." I felt like I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. She was using him. She was taking the only pure, innocent thing in our lives and twisting it into a weapon to bludgeon me into submission. She was traumatizing her own son just to get a signature. Nia looked at me over the top of the phone. Her eyes were dry and hard as flint. "Say goodbye to Grandpa Leo," she said coldly. "Because if he does not help us, you are never going to see him again. We are going to move far away where Grandpa cannot find us." "No," Leo screamed. "Grandpa!" Nia ended the call. The screen went black. The silence that returned to the hallway was heavier than lead. She put the phone back in her pocket and crossed her arms. There she said calmly, "Now he knows the truth." "You are a monster," I whispered. My voice was hoarse. "You are destroying him." "I am doing what I have to do to survive," she countered. "Now are you going to sign the authorization, or do I need to call him back and tell him that Grandpa hates him?" The front door opened and Brad stormed in. He had heard the yelling. He looked from Nia's defiant face to my shattered one and understood immediately what had happened. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look disgusted by his wife's cruelty. He looked impressed. "Good job, babe," he muttered to her. Then he turned to me. "You heard her, old man. This is the end game. You sign that paper or you die alone in this house. We will take Leo. We will move to another state. You will never see him grow up. You will never get a phone call on Christmas. You will rot here surrounded by your precious memories until the neighbors smell your corpse." He stepped closer, looming over me. "Is that what you want, Malik? Do you want to die alone? Because that is the choice. The money or your family. Decide. Now." I looked at them. I looked at the daughter I had carried on my shoulders. I looked at the man she had chosen. And in that moment, the last ember of doubt was extinguished. The grief I had felt for the loss of my family evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. They were not my family. They were hostage takers. And I do not negotiate with terrorists, but they needed to believe they had won. They needed to believe I was broken. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands shake visibly. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a tear to leak out. "Please," I whispered, "do not take Leo away. He is all I have." "Then sign," Brad commanded, thrusting a pen into my hand. I took the pen. I walked over to the small telephone table in the hallway. I laid the folder down. This is a preliminary authorization," I stammered, pulling out a document I had printed off the internet hours ago. It was a generic power of attorney form, completely invalid without a notary, and filled with clauses I had added in fine print that nullified the entire thing upon review. But to their greedy, untrained eyes, it looked like surrender. "It tells the bank you are authorizing the transfer of the deed pending the funds." I lied. "Just sign it," Nia said, her voice tight. I pressed the pen to the paper. I hesitated one last time, looking up at her. "Nia," I said softly, "are you sure about this? Once I sign this, there is no going back." She didn't even blink. "Sign it, Dad." I signed. I scribbled a signature that looked like mine but lacked the specific flourish I used for legal documents. It was a signature of a defeated old man, not the precision mark of the architect. Brad snatched the paper before the ink was dry. Finally, he shouted. He held it up like a trophy. "We are in business." Nia let out a breath she had been holding. She didn't look at me. She looked at the paper. "Get your coat, Dad," she said, her voice returning to a business-like monotone. "Brad will drive you to the bank. I will stay here and start packing up the valuables. We need to get this house listed by Monday." I put on my coat. I buttoned it slowly. I watched Brad fold the fake document and put it in his pocket as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "You made the right choice, Malik," Brad said, slapping me on the back with a force that was meant to hurt. "See? It wasn't so hard. Now you get to see Leo again." I looked at him. I looked at Nia, who was already walking into the living room, eyeing the silver candlesticks on the mantel. "Yes," I said quietly. "I made the choice." I walked out the door with Brad, leaving my home behind. He thought he was driving me to my surrender. He didn't know I was being driven to my liberation. And he certainly didn't know that the valuables Nia was packing were about to become the property of a veterans charity, and that the only thing they would inherit from me was a cardboard box full of Monopoly money and a prison sentence. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it, dragging their own child as bait. God help them, because I certainly wouldn't. Brad pulled the car to the curb in front of a nondescript brick building on the edge of downtown, the brakes of his leased sedan squealing slightly. He put the car in park and reached for his seatbelt, his face set in a mask of impatient determination. "We are here," he announced, looking at the faded gold lettering on the glass door that read, "Wright and Associates, Attorneys at Law. Let us go inside and get this notarized so we can get to the bank. I have a tea time at 3. I placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "No," I said, my voice low and serious. "You stay here." Brad frowned, his brow furrowing in suspicion. "What are you talking about? I am coming in with you. I need to make sure you do not try to pull any fast ones, old man." I shook my head slowly, feigning a look of nervous apprehension. "You do not understand Brad. Clarence Wright is 80 years old. He has been practicing law in this district since before the Civil Rights Act was fully enforced. He marched with King. He was beaten by police in Birmingham." "So what?" Brad snapped. "What does that have to do with me?" I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Clarence hates white people, Brad. He despises them. If I walk in there with you, a young white stockbroker in an Italian suit, he will shut down. He will find a reason to delay the paperwork for weeks just to spite you. He will claim the seal is broken or the printer is jammed. He is a stubborn old mule, and he holds grudges that are older than you are." Brad hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. He looked at the building, then back at me. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He believed me. Of course he believed me. In his world, prejudice was a tool to be used or avoided, and he was terrified of anything that might delay his $600,000. "Are you serious?" he asked, looking at the door with newfound wariness. "Dead serious." I lied smoothly. "If you want this done today, you need to let me go in alone. I will tell him it is for a medical emergency. He will sign it in 5 minutes. If you walk in there, we will be here all day." Brad let out a huff of annoyance and settled back into his seat. "Fine. Whatever. Just get it done. I will give you 10 minutes. If you are not out by then, I am coming in, and I do not care who he marched with." I nodded gratefully, grabbing my leather satchel. "Thank you, Brad. Smart move." I stepped out of the car and walked toward the building. I kept my posture stooped, my steps shuffling until I was through the double doors and out of his line of sight. The moment the heavy glass clicked shut behind me, I straightened my spine. The shuffling old man vanished. Malik Thompson, the man who had commanded construction crews of hundreds, returned. I walked past the empty receptionist desk and straight to the back office. The door was open. Clarence Wright was sitting behind a desk that was buried under stacks of files, the air thick with the smell of old paper and peppermint tea. He looked up as I entered, his sharp eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. He did not smile. He did not ask how I was. He saw the look on my face, the set of my jaw, and he knew. "Close the door, Malik," he said, his voice like gravel grinding together. I closed the door and locked it. I sat down in the chair opposite him and placed my burner phone on the desk. Activate the Omega protocol. Clarence, I said. Clarence took a slow sip of his tea. He placed the cup down with a deliberate clink. Are you sure? There is no coming back from this. This is the nuclear option. I thought of Leo crying on the video call. I thought of Nia using my grandson as a weapon. I thought of Brad waiting in the car checking his watch, planning to put me in a home that smelled of bleach. They threatened to take Leo away, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. They threatened to let me rot. They forged my signature on loan applications. Clarence's eyes hardened. He reached into his bottom drawer and pulled out a thick red folder. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. We had set this protocol up 10 years ago, right after Etta died, as a failsafe in case I lost my mind or my family lost their morals. It seemed the latter had come to pass. Let us begin, Clarence said, opening the folder. First, the brokerage accounts I commanded. Liquidate everything in the domestic portfolio, every stock, every bond, every mutual fund. Sell it all at market price. I do not care about the loss. I want the cash in the Tokyo Trust by close of business today. Clarence typed furiously on his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Done. The sell orders are executing now. The funds will be wired to the Cayman Holding Company and then to Tokyo within the hour. The IRS will take a hit, but you will be gone before the audit notice is even printed. Next, the joint account with Nia, I said. This was the one that hurt. This was the account I had set up when she was 18. I had told her it was for emergencies, but I had been secretly depositing $2,000 a month into it for 14 years. It was supposed to be her safety net. It was supposed to be her freedom fund if she ever needed to leave Brad. Instead, she had let Brad use it to buy handbags for his mistress. Drain it, I said, feeling a phantom pain in my chest. Leave exactly $1 in it so the account remains open but useless. Transfer the rest to the charity fund. Clarence looked at me over his glasses. You know this will bounce every check she has written in the last 3 days? The electric bill, the car payment, the grocery run. Good, I said. Let them feel what it is like to have zero balance. Let them feel the panic. Done, Clarence said, hitting the enter key with a finality that echoed in the room. Now the house, I said. This was the big one. The house was the bait. The house was the prize Brad was salivating over in the car outside. I pulled the deed out of my satchel. It was the original yellowed with age signed by Etta and me 40 years ago. I placed it on the desk. Transfer ownership immediately, I said. To the Veterans Housing Alliance. Sell price $1. Clarence picked up the deed. He looked at it with reverence. This is a prime asset, Malik. It is worth nearly $700,000. You are giving it away. I am not giving it away, I corrected him. I am investing it in men and women who actually understand the meaning of duty and honor. I want the transfer recorded electronically right now. I want the title to show the new owner before I walk out of this office. Clarence nodded. He understood. By transferring the property to a non-profit for a nominal fee, I was putting it instantly out of reach. Brad could not sell it. The bank could not foreclose on it for Brad's debts because Brad's name was never on it, and now neither was mine. Even if they sued me, they would be suing to take a home away from disabled veterans. No judge in this state would entertain that motion. It is filing now, Clarence said, watching the progress bar on his screen. County Clerk's Office, recorded. It is done. You are officially homeless, Malik. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I wasn't homeless. I was free. One last thing I said. The box. Clarence reached behind him and grabbed a small, pre-packed cardboard box from the shelf. He handed it to me. It was heavy. Inside were the photocopies of every check I had ever written to Nia, every tuition payment, every car note. It also contained the full report from the private investigator regarding Brad's embezzlement and his affair. I took the box. I opened my satchel and placed the documents inside. Thank you, Clarence, I said, standing up. Clarence stood up too. He walked around the desk and hugged me. It was a fierce, strong hug between two men who had survived segregation, recessions, and loss. Be safe, my friend, Clarence whispered. Do not look back. I won't. I promised. I checked my watch. 8 minutes had passed. I adjusted my coat, messed up my hair slightly to look frazzled, and put the mask of the defeated old man back on. I walked out of the office, leaving my legacy behind in the digital ether. I walked out into the bright sunlight where Brad was waiting, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. I got into the car and slumped in the seat, clutching the fake notarized paper I had prepared beforehand. Did you get it? Brad asked, starting the engine before my door was even closed. I held up the dummy paper, my hand shaking. Yes, I whispered. He signed it. Brad grinned, a predatory baring of teeth. Good. Now let us go to the bank and get my money. He pulled away from the curb, tires screeching. He thought he was driving toward a payday. He didn't know he was driving a getaway car for a man who had just burned the entire world down around him. We pulled up to the First National Bank tower in the heart of the financial district, the brakes of Brad's leased sedan screeching as he jerked the car into a parking spot reserved for handicap access. He didn't have a permit, of course. He just didn't care. Rules were for other people, for little people like me, not for masters of the universe like Brad. You wait here, he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. I will go in and get the manager. We do not want to wait in line with the peasants. I reached out and gripped his wrist. My hand was strong, stronger than he expected, and for a second a flicker of fear crossed his eyes before he masked it with annoyance. No, I said, my voice low and steady. This is my bank, Brad. I have banked here for 40 years. If you go in there shouting and waving your arms, security will throw you out before you reach the teller. Let me handle this. I have a relationship here. Brad pulled his arm away, sneering. A relationship. You probably have a checking account with $100 in it. Fine. Lead the way, old man. But if you stall, I am taking over. I opened the car door and stepped out onto the pavement. The sun was high and bright, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out from my feet like paths to a new life. I adjusted my jacket, buttoning it to hide the slight tremble in my hands. It wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. I was about to walk into a lion's den, armed only with a bluff. We walked into the lobby. It was a cathedral of marble and glass, echoing with the hushed murmurs of commerce. Brad looked around with a hungry expression, smelling the money in the air. He strode toward the teller line, ready to cut in front of a young mother holding a baby. I grabbed his elbow and steered him toward the side of the room, toward a heavy oak door marked Private Wealth Management. Where are we going? Brad hissed. The tellers are over there. Trust me, I whispered. I walked up to the receptionist, sitting behind the mahogany desk guarding the door. She was a young woman I didn't recognize, new blood. She looked at my worn coat, my scuffed shoes, and then at Brad's flashy suit, and her eyes lingered on him. Can I help you, gentlemen? She asked, her tone polite but dismissive. Yes, I said, leaning forward and resting my hands on the desk. My name is Malik Thompson. I need to see Mrs. Sterling immediately. Tell her I'm invoking the Onyx Protocol. Brad snorted behind me. Onyx Protocol? What is this, a spy movie? Just tell her we need to make a wire transfer. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. She typed something into her computer, her fingers moving quickly. She stopped, looked at the screen, and then looked up at me. Her expression had changed completely. The dismissiveness was gone, replaced by a sudden flustered deference. Mr. Thompson? She stammered. I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you. Mrs. Sterling is in a meeting, but for you, I will get her right away. Please have a seat in the executive suite. She stood up and rushed to open the heavy oak door, ushering us into a plush waiting room stocked with sparkling water and leather armchairs. Brad looked at me, his mouth slightly open. Onyx Protocol. He asked, his voice losing some of its edge. What does that mean? I sat down in one of the leather chairs and crossed my legs. It means I have been a customer here a long time, Brad. It means they know not to waste my time. It was a half-truth. The Onyx status was reserved for clients with assets over $10 million. It was a status I had earned quietly, building my wealth brick by brick while living in a house that needed a paint job. Brad didn't know that. He just thought I had pulled a fast one. A moment later, Mrs. Sterling walked in. She was a woman of grace and steel, the regional manager who had handled my accounts for 15 years. She knew about my wife. She knew about the trust funds. She knew everything. Malik, she said, extending her hand warmly, ignoring Brad completely. It is so good to see you, although I must say I was not expecting you today. Is everything all right? I stood and shook her hand. Mrs. Sterling, this is my son-in-law, Brad. We are here to handle a very sensitive, very urgent transfer of funds. Brad stepped forward, puffing out his chest. Yeah, we need to wire $600,000. Today. Right now. Mrs. Sterling looked at him, her gaze cooling by 10 degrees. I see. And you are authorized on Mr. Thompson's accounts. I stepped in before Brad could explode. He is assisting me, I said quickly. I am liquidating a legacy asset, the house. I need to transfer the equity to his account to cover a family emergency. Mrs. Sterling looked at me. She looked at my eyes. We had played poker once at a charity gala. She knew my tells. She saw the slight tilt of my head, the way I held my breath for a fraction of a second. She knew I was lying. She knew I was under duress. But she also knew I was Malik Thompson. I didn't do things without a plan. I see, she said slowly. Well, for a transfer of that magnitude, we will need to go to my office. We followed her into a corner office with a view of the skyline, a skyline I had helped design. I sat in the client chair. Brad hovered behind me, too anxious to sit. Here is the situation, I said, placing the fake notarized power of attorney on her desk. We need to initiate the transfer immediately. Brad is under a tight deadline. Mrs. Sterling picked up the paper. She glanced at it. She saw the generic wording, the lack of a raised seal, the fine print that made it worthless. She looked up at me. Her eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. Mr. Thompson, she said carefully. This document, it authorizes the request for a transfer. But you know that due to federal banking regulations regarding large sum movements, especially from property equity, there is a mandatory 24-hour clearing period. Brad slammed his hand on the back of my chair. What? 24 hours? We don't have 24 hours. I need that money in my account by 5 p.m. today or I am dead meat. Mrs. Sterling didn't flinch. Sir, those are the regulations. The Patriot Act requires us to vet all large transfers to prevent money laundering and fraud. Unless you want the FBI to freeze the assets entirely, we have to follow the protocol. Brad turned red. This is bullshit. You are just stalling. I turned to him. Brad, listened to her. If we push too hard, they flag the account. Then nobody gets the money. 24 hours is fine. The court just needs to see that the transfer is pending. They need proof of intent. I turned back to Mrs. Sterling. Can you provide us with a transaction receipt, something that shows the transfer has been initiated and is pending clearance, something official that he can show to his creditors? Mrs. Sterling looked at me. She understood. I was asking for a prop. Of course, she said smoothly. I can print out the standard transfer initiation record. It will show the amount, the destination account, and the pending status. I will seal it in a certified bank envelope. That should satisfy any legal inquiries until the funds clear tomorrow morning. Brad looked between us, his eyes darting back and forth. He was out of his depth. He knew how to bully people, but he didn't know how the banking system worked at this level. Fine, he spat. Just give me the paper. If that money isn't there tomorrow morning, Malik, I swear to God. It will be there, I said softly. Just get the receipt. Mrs. Sterling turned to her computer. She typed for a moment. The printer in the corner whirred to life. She wasn't printing a transfer order. I knew what she was printing. It was likely the bank's privacy policy and a generic request for information form that listed the account balance as pending inquiry. It was pages of bureaucratic nonsense that looked impressive but meant absolutely nothing. She gathered the sheaf of papers about 10 pages thick. She tapped them on the desk to straighten them. Then, with a flourish that was pure theater, she placed them inside a large white envelope. She stamped the outside with a red ink stamp that read, "Confidential, pending transaction." She handed the envelope to me. I held it for a moment. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. I turned and handed it to Brad. Here, I said, $600,000. Pending clearance. Brad snatched the envelope from my hand. He didn't open it. He saw the stamp. He saw the thickness. He saw his salvation. His entire demeanor changed. The aggression melted away, replaced by a smug, self-satisfied grin that made my stomach turn. Finally, he said, tapping the envelope against his palm. See? Was that so hard? You just had to listen to reason. He looked at Mrs. Sterling. Thanks for doing your job, lady. Eventually. Mrs. Sterling smiled a smile that could have frozen water. You are very welcome, sir. Have a pleasant day. We walked out of the bank. Brad was practically skipping. He was already on his phone texting Nia, telling her they had won, telling her the old man had folded. I walked beside him, my hands in my pockets. I felt lighter than I had in years. The charade was over. The trap was sprung. All that was left now was the disappearance. We got back to the car. Brad tossed the envelope onto the dashboard as if it were a trophy. I am going to drop you at the house, he said, starting the engine. Nia is packing up the silver. You should probably help her. We want the place empty for the estate sale guys on Monday. I nodded, staring out the window at the city I loved, the city I was about to leave. Sure, Brad, I said. I will help her pack. I would help her pack, all right. I would help her pack a lifetime of regret into a single cardboard box, and then I would be gone before the first tear hit the floor. I stood over the heavy cast iron pot, stirring the roux with a wooden spoon that was older than my daughter. The kitchen smelled of roasted flour, celery, bell peppers, and onions, the holy trinity of the cuisine my mother and her mother before her had perfected. I was making gumbo. It was a slow process, a meditative ritual that required patience and respect, two things that were entirely absent from the rest of my house. This was not a celebration dinner, it was a funeral rite. I was cooking for the ghosts of the family I thought I had. In the dining room I could hear the clinking of glass and the boisterous laughter of a man who believes he has gotten away with murder. Brad had found my wine cellar. It was a modest collection tucked away in the basement, but it held a few treasures I had been saving for special occasions. He had brought up a bottle of 1982 Chateau Margaux. It was a bottle I had bought the year Etta and I renewed our vows in Paris. I had been saving it for Leo's 21st birthday. Now Brad was pouring it into a water glass, filling it to the brim as if it were cheap fruit juice. I ladled the gumbo into bowls, the dark, rich broth teeming with shrimp crab and andouille sausage. I carried the tray into the dining room. Brad was leaning back in my chair, Etta's chair, with his feet hooked around the legs. He held the glass of wine in one hand and was scrolling through his phone with the other. Nia was sitting across from him, tapping furiously on her tablet, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. Dinner is served, I said, placing the bowls down. Brad looked at the gumbo and wrinkled his nose. What is this stuff again, Malik? Swamp mud. He laughed at his own joke, a wet hacking sound that grated on my nerves. It is gumbo, Brad, I said quietly, taking my seat at the head of the table. It is a traditional dish. Yeah, soul food, right? Brad sneered, picking up his spoon and slurping a mouthful without blowing on it. He chewed loudly, open-mouthed, oblivious to the complexity of the flavors, the history in the bowl. He swallowed and washed it down with a massive gulp of the vintage Bordeaux. Needs salt, he announced, reaching for the shaker before he had even tasted a second bite. And maybe some hot sauce. Do you have any ketchup? This tastes kind of earthy. He was desecrating a masterpiece with ketchup. He was drinking a $1,000 bottle of wine like it was soda. I watched him and I felt nothing. No anger, no indignation, just a cold, clinical detachment. He was a pig eating pearls. It did not diminish the value of the pearls, it only exposed the nature of the pig. Nia did not even look at her food. She was too busy swiping through images of villas in Tuscany. Brad. Look at this one, she said, turning her tablet toward him. It is just outside of Florence. It has a pool and a private chef. If we book now for next month, we can get the early bird rate. Brad leaned over, chewing on a piece of sausage. Nice. How much? $5,000 for the week, Nia said casually. But since we will have the extra cash from the house sale after we pay off your issue, we deserve a break. The stress has been killing me. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap. I did not eat. I had lost my appetite hours ago. I poured myself a cup of tepid tea and watched them plan their victory lap. They were spending the equity of my home before the ink was even dry on the fake receipt. They were planning a European vacation with the money that represented 40 years of my sweat and blood. You know, Brad said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, staining his expensive cuff with gumbo sauce. We should probably get a new car too. The lease is up on the Beamer next month. Maybe a Range Rover. Something with presence. Definitely, Nia agreed. We need something reliable if we are going to be driving Leo to private school. Oh, I forgot to tell you I put in the application for St. Jude's. The tuition is steep, but with the house money we can cover the first 2 years easy. They were carving up my carcass right in front of me. I took a sip of tea. The ceramic cup felt cool against my lips. I cleared my throat. The sound was soft, but it cut through their chatter like a knife. Nia, I said. She looked up, annoyed at the interruption. What, Dad? Can't you see we are planning? I looked her in the eye. I looked deep, searching for any remnant of the daughter who used to save her allowance to buy me birthday cards. I just have one question. I said, my voice steady and low. She sighed, putting the tablet down. What is it? I gestured to the tablet to the images of Italian villas and luxury cars. I gestured to the house around us, the walls that had sheltered her. You are planning to spend all the money from the house sale, I said. You are paying Brad's debt. You are going to Europe. You are buying cars. So she snapped. It is our inheritance, Dad. We are just getting it a little early. What is the big deal? The big deal, I said, is that I am still alive. Brad snorted into his wine glass. Barely, old man. Barely. I ignored him. My eyes were locked on Nia. Did it ever cross your mind, I asked, that I might need that money? Did you ever stop to think that maybe I wanted to use the equity in my own home to pay for my old age? To pay for medical bills if I get sick? To maybe take a trip of my own? The room went silent. The clock on the wall ticked rhythmically, counting down the seconds of our relationship. Nia looked at me. Her expression did not soften. There was no flash of guilt. There was only a cold, pragmatic calculation. She picked up her spoon and stirred her gumbo, looking bored. "Oh, Dad, please," she said with a dismissive laugh. "You have your pension. You get Social Security. You have lived a simple life forever. What do you need money for? You just sit around and read books. You do not need $600,000 to sit in a chair." She took a bite of the food I had cooked for her and swallowed. "Besides," she added, her voice dripping with entitlement, "you are 70 years old. You have had your time. It is our turn to live now. You do not need the money to grow old. You just need enough. And we will make sure you have enough to get by in whatever facility we find." The words hung in the air. Toxic. Final. You have a pension. You do not need money. It is our turn. It was the answer I expected, but hearing it spoken aloud was like watching a guillotine blade drop. It severed the last nerve. It killed the last hope. She did not see me as a person with dreams or needs. She saw me as a biological function that had outlived its utility. To her, I was just a vessel that was hoarding resources she felt she deserved. I looked at Brad, who was pouring the last of my wedding wine into his glass. I looked at Nia, who was already turning back to her tablet, dreaming of Tuscany. I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "You are right, Nia," I said softly. "I suppose I do not need much." "Good," she said without looking up. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable." I stood up. I picked up my teacup. "Enjoy the gumbo," I said. "It is a family recipe." I walked out of the dining room, leaving them to their feast. They did not watch me go. They were too busy consuming. I walked into the living room and looked around one last time. I imprinted the image of my home in my mind, not as it was now tainted by their greed, but as it had been. I remembered Etta dancing in the hallway. I remembered Nia taking her first steps. I walked to the front door. I did not look back. I had my answer. The jury had returned the verdict, guilty. And the sentence was total abandonment. I went upstairs to my bedroom to wait for the dawn. I did not sleep. I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker. I waited for the sun to rise on the day I would cease to exist for them. And as I waited, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. They thought they were eating a victory dinner. They did not know it was the last meal of the condemned. 3 a.m. is a ghost hour. It is the time when the house settles into its bones and the silence is so thick you can hear the hum of the refrigerator from 2 rooms away. I stood in the hallway of the home I had owned for 40 years, listening to the rhythmic snoring of my son-in-law drifting down from the guest room upstairs. He slept deeply, the sleep of a man who thinks he has won the lottery. I did not sleep. I was dressed in my charcoal traveling suit, the one I usually saved for board meetings in Tokyo or London. My shoes were polished. My tie was knotted with a precision that defied the trembling in my old hands. I began my final patrol. I walked into the living room where the moonlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long blue shadows on the floor. I ran my hand along the back of the sofa Etta had picked out 20 years ago. I touched the keys of the upright piano where Nia had practiced scales reluctantly for years. I did not play a note. The music in this house had died a long time ago. I moved to the mantel above the fireplace. This was the altar of my life. Framed photographs stood in regimented rows documenting the history of the Thompson family. There was Etta on our wedding day, radiant in white lace. There was Nia in her graduation cap, smiling with a hope that had long since curdled into entitlement. There was Leo taking his first steps. I picked up the silver frame holding Etta's picture. She was looking at the camera with that knowing smile of hers, the one that said she saw right through me. If she were here, she would be heartbroken, but she would also be furious. She would not have let them treat us this way. "I am sorry, Etta," I whispered into the quiet room. "I tried. I really tried. I did not put the photo in my bag. I could not take the memories with me. If I was leaving, I had to leave it all. Taking the photo would be an act of sentimental weakness, and I needed to be made of stone to get through the next hour." I kissed the cold glass and then deliberately placed the frame face down on the mantel. It was a closing of the eyes, a final goodbye. I turned away, leaving the other photos standing. Let them look at the happy memories while they destroy the reality. I walked to the front door where my small leather carry-on bag sat waiting. It was light. Inside there were no clothes, no toiletries, no mementos. There was only my passport, my laptop, the ledger with my account codes, and the burner phone. Everything else, 40 years of accumulation, furniture, books, clothes, tools, artwork, I was leaving behind. I was walking away from a museum of my own life. I walked back to the dining room one last time. The smell of the gumbo I had cooked hours earlier still lingered faintly in the air, a ghost of a meal shared with wolves. I placed the cardboard box in the exact center of the table. It was a plain brown box taped shut with heavy packing tape. On the top, in thick black marker, I had written, "For Naya and Brad, the $600,000 you need." It sat there innocuous and terrifying. It was the punchline to a joke they did not know was being told. It was the trapdoor beneath their feet. I checked my watch. 3:15. The Uber was 2 minutes away. I put on my trench coat and my fedora. I looked around the kitchen. I checked the stove to make sure it was off. Old habits die hard. I washed the single teacup I had used and placed it in the drying rack. I wanted them to find the house in perfect order. I wanted the contrast between the tidiness of the home and the chaos of their lives to be absolute. Headlights swept across the front window, illuminating the room for a brief, blinding second. My ride was here. I did not look upstairs. I did not say a silent goodbye to the daughter sleeping in her old room. I had said my goodbyes at dinner when she told me I was a burden. The Nia sleeping upstairs was a stranger. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool night air. The street was empty and silent. The oak trees I had planted along the sidewalk stood like sentinels watching me leave. I closed the door behind me. I locked it with the key I had carried on my ring for 4 decades. Then I slid the key through the brass mail slot. I heard it hit the floor inside with a metallic clatter. There was no going back now. I walked down the driveway past Brad's leased luxury car, which sat there looking smug and out of place. I opened the back door of the black sedan waiting at the curb and slid inside. The interior smelled of vanilla air freshener and stale coffee. "Good morning," the driver said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "Heading to the airport?" "Yes," I said, settling back into the seat. "International terminal." The car pulled away, gliding silently down the street. I looked out the window, watching my house recede into the darkness. The porch light was still on, a beacon for a family that no longer existed. I watched it get smaller and smaller until we turned the corner and it was gone. A physical pain hit me in the chest, sharp and sudden. It felt as if a hook had been embedded in my heart and was being ripped out. That was my life back there. That was where I had loved and grieved and aged. I was leaving it all to be scavenged by vultures. "Are you going on vacation?" the driver asked, making polite conversation over the low hum of the radio. I looked at the passing streetlights blurring into streaks of gold against the black sky. We were passing the park where I used to take Nia on Sundays. We were passing the school where I had attended PTA meetings. We were passing the church where Etta's funeral was held. "No," I said, my voice rough. "I am moving." "Oh, wow," the driver said. "Moving at night, huh? Must be a long flight. Where are you headed?" "Tokyo," I said. "Tokyo, that is far. Business or pleasure?" "Survival," I whispered. The driver glanced at me again, sensing the weight in my words, and wisely decided to stop asking questions. He turned up the jazz music on the radio, soft saxophone notes that filled the space between us. I leaned my head against the cool glass. The city was speeding up around us as we hit the highway. The skyline I had helped build rose up in the distance, a jagged silhouette of steel and glass against the indigo horizon. I saw the spire of the Thompson Tower, the building the firm had named after me when I retired. My family did not even know it existed. They thought I pushed pencils. They did not know I pushed clouds. I looked at my hands resting on my knees. They were old hands, spotted with age, but they were still strong. They had built a fortune, and now they had dismantled a life. I felt a tear track hot and slow down my cheek. I did not wipe it away. I let it fall. It was not a tear of regret. I did not regret what I had done. I did not regret the scorched earth. I regretted that it had been necessary. I regretted that the love I had poured into my daughter had flowed into a vessel with a hole in the bottom. The airport signs began to appear green and reflective in the headlights. Departures. International. I sat up straighter. The pain in my chest began to subside, replaced by a cold, hollow clarity. I was Malik Thompson. I was 70 years old. I had money. I had my health. And for the first time in a long time, I had my dignity. The car pulled up to the curb at the terminal. The sliding glass doors were open, inviting me into the bright, artificial light of the concourse. "We are here," the driver said. I handed him a $100 bill. "Keep the change." "Thank you, sir. Have a safe flight." I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of jet fuel and exhaust. It was the smell of transition. I grabbed my small bag and walked toward the doors. I did not look back at the city. I did not look back at the dark horizon where my house stood. I looked forward at the departure board listing cities and times. I walked into the terminal, ready to disappear. I was a ghost now, and ghosts do not look back. The sun rose over the historic district with a brilliance that felt almost mocking, piercing through the expensive linen curtains of the guest bedroom where Brad and Naya lay tangled in sheets that smelled of stale wine and victory. It was 10 in the morning. They had overslept, sedated by the heavy bottle of vintage Bordeaux they had stolen from my cellar and the intoxicating belief that they had won the war. Brad was the first to stir, groaning as the light hit his face, his head throbbing with the dull ache of a hangover that no amount of money could cure. He rolled over, reaching for his phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen through bleary eyes. 10 o'clock. He sat up with a jolt, panic briefly warring with his headache. The bank opened at 9. The old man was supposed to be back by 8 with the cashier's check. Brad kicked off the covers, nudging Nia awake with a rough shove. "Get up!" he grunted, his voice thick with sleep. "Your dad isn't back. We need to go downstairs." Nia moaned, pulling the pillow over her head. "Relax, Brad. He is probably just slow. He is 70. Maybe he stopped for oatmeal. Or maybe he is just sitting in the kitchen waiting for us to give him permission to speak." But the silence in the house was not the quiet of a peaceful morning. It was the heavy, absolute silence of a tomb. There was no smell of coffee brewing. There was no sound of the radio playing low in the kitchen. There was no creak of floorboards from my morning pacing. Brad stood up, pulling on his pants, stumbling slightly. He walked into the hallway. It was empty. The door to my bedroom was open, and the bed was made perfectly, the sheets smooth and undisturbed. It looked like a museum exhibit, not a place where a living, breathing man slept. Nia joined him, wrapping a silk robe around herself, her face puffy from sleep and wine. "Where is he?" she asked, a frown creasing her forehead. "I do not know," Brad muttered, pushing past her. "Let us check the kitchen." They walked down the stairs, the wood cold under their bare feet. The living room was pristine. The curtains were drawn, letting in slivers of dust-mote-filled light. The furniture sat rigid and accusatory. They rounded the corner into the dining room and stopped dead. The table was cleared. The dirty dishes from the night before were gone, washed and put away. The wine glasses were polished and returned to the cabinet. The only thing on the mahogany surface was a single brown cardboard box sitting squarely in the center, taped shut with heavy industrial packing tape. On top, written in my steady architectural hand, was the message, "For Naya and Brad, the $600,000 you need." Brad let out a breath he had been holding, a laugh bubbling up in his chest. "See," he said, pointing a shaking finger at the box. "I told you, he did it. He actually did it. He probably left the cash or the check in the box and went for a walk to cry about it." Nia smiled, her eyes lighting up with greed. "Oh my God, it is really happening. We are rich, Brad. We are actually rich." They rushed to the table like children on Christmas morning, ignoring the ominous feeling that should have warned them. They did not wonder why I would leave the money in a box instead of handing it to them. They did not wonder why the house felt so abandoned. They only saw the prize. Brad grabbed a steak knife from the kitchen counter. his movements jerky and eager. He slashed through the tape with a violent motion, the sound tearing through the quiet room. He ripped the flaps open, his breath coming in short, excited gasps. Nia leaned over his shoulder, her hands gripping the back of the chair so hard her knuckles turned white. "What is it?" she asked breathlessly. "Is it cash? Is it a check?" Brad reached in and pulled out a handful of paper. His smile froze. Then it faltered. Then it vanished, completely replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. It was money, but it was not green. It was pink and yellow and blue. It was Monopoly money. Hundreds of bills of play money fluttering down onto the table like confetti at a disastrous parade. "What the hell is this?" Brad whispered, his voice trembling with a rising fury. "Is this a joke? Is the old man playing games?" He dug deeper into the box, throwing handfuls of fake money onto the floor, looking for the real check, looking for the salvation he was owed. There was no check. Instead, his hand closed around a thick manila envelope. He pulled it out. It was heavy. "This must be it," Nia said, her voice shrill with panic. "The documents, the transfer papers. Open it, Brad." Brad tore the envelope open. He dumped the contents onto the table on top of the pile of fake cash. Photographs spilled out, dozens of them. Glossy, high-resolution images taken with a telephoto lens. Nia gasped, reaching for one. It was a picture of Brad at a jewelry store. He was kissing a blonde woman, a woman Nia had never seen before. He was handing the woman a diamond bracelet. Nia picked up another photo. Brad and the woman entering a hotel. Brad and the woman at a casino laughing over a roulette wheel. "What is this?" Nia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Brad, who is she?" Brad went pale, the color draining from his face until he looked like a corpse. He recognized the photos. He recognized the dates. But there was more. Beneath the photos was a stack of bank statements. Not my bank statements. His. Statements from offshore accounts he thought were hidden. Statements showing the embezzlement, showing the wire transfers, showing the theft of client funds. And right on top of the pile was a copy of a letter addressed to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The letter was signed by me, Malik Thompson. Nia was screaming now, holding up a photo of the blonde woman wearing the Hermes bag that had been bought with Nia's retirement fund. "You spent our money on her. You told me we were broke because of the market. You liar. You thief." Brad ignored her. He was reading the letter. His hands shook so violently the paper rattled. He read the part where I detailed his fraud, where I provided the account numbers, where I listed the dates and times of his illegal transactions. He dropped the letter and looked back into the box. There was one final item at the bottom, a single sheet of crisp white stationery. He picked it up. Nia stopped screaming and leaned in to read it, her tears dripping onto the fake money. The note was written in my handwriting, calm and precise. "Dear Nia and Brad, I have paid my debts in this life. I raised a daughter. I loved a wife. I built a home. You demanded $600,000. Here it is. The value of the truth is priceless. The house now belongs to the Veterans Housing Alliance. The locks have been changed electronically. You are trespassing. The money you wanted is gone, donated to people who know the meaning of honor. And Brad, the authorities have the originals of these documents. They received them at 8 o'clock this morning. I owe you nothing. Goodbye, Dad." Brad stared at the note. His brain tried to process the magnitude of the catastrophe. The money was gone. The house was gone. His secret life was exposed, and the FBI was likely already on their way. He looked up at the empty room, at the silent walls that had witnessed his arrogance the night before. He looked at Nia, who was staring at him with a mixture of hatred and horror. He realized then that he was not the hunter. He was the prey. And the trap had just snapped shut on his neck. A sound built in his throat, a guttural, animalistic noise that started low in his chest and rose until it tore through his vocal cords. No, he screamed. It was a scream of pure, primal terror. It was the sound of a man watching his life disintegrate into dust. He swept his arm across the table, sending the Monopoly money, the incriminating photos, and the damning note flying across the room. "No, no, no," he roared, kicking the chair over, smashing his fist into the wall. Nia sank to the floor, sobbing, clutching the picture of the mistress to her chest, her world ending in a rain of pink paper money. And in the distance, rising above the sound of Brad's screams and Nia's sobs, came a new sound. A low wail that grew louder and louder. Sirens. They were coming. And this time there was no one left to save them. I scrambled through the sea of pink and blue paper money, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I snatched my phone from the table, my thumb hammering the speed dial for Malik. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know if I was going to beg, threaten, or scream. I just knew I needed the old man to answer. I needed this to be a sick joke. I needed the money to be real. The phone rang once, twice, then a mechanical click. The voice that followed was not Malik's. It was a computerized recording, cold and indifferent. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. Please check the number and try again. I stared at the screen. Disconnected. Malik hadn't just left. He had erased himself. He had cut the line. Try again! Nia shrieked, scrambling up from the floor, her silk robe stained with tears. Call him again. Maybe he is on the plane. Maybe the signal is bad. I dialed again. The same recording. The number you have dialed. I hurled the phone across the room. It smashed into the wall, cracking the screen, a spiderweb of glass over the image of my life, shattering. He is gone, Nia, I whispered, the reality finally piercing through the layers of my narcissism. He is really gone. And he took the money. He took the house. He took everything. The wail of the sirens outside cut off my words. They weren't distant anymore. They were deafening. The sound filled the house, vibrating in the floorboards, rattling the fine china in the cabinet. It was a sound that signaled the end of the world. Blue and red lights flashed through the sheer curtains, painting the dining room in a strobe of chaotic color. It looked like a disco for the damned. I ran to the window and peered through the crack in the drapes. My knees buckled. 3 squad cars were parked at chaotic angles on the lawn. 2 unmarked black sedans were blocking the driveway. Men in windbreakers with yellow lettering were swarming the porch. It is the feds, I choked out, stumbling back from the window. It is the FBI. Nia, they are here for me. Nia looked at me, her eyes wide with a terror that transcended greed. What did you do, Brad? What did you really do? I borrowed some money. I stammered, backing away toward the kitchen as if I could outrun the inevitable. I was going to put it back. I just needed time. Your dad. He was supposed to buy me time. Bam. Bam. Bam! The pounding on the front door shook the entire house. Police federal agents opened the door. I didn't move. I stood frozen in the center of the dining room, surrounded by the fake money that mocked my ambition. I looked like a trapped animal, my eyes darting from the back door to the stairs, calculating odds that didn't exist. Open the door, or we will breach. Nia let out a whimper and covered her ears. Then came the crash, the sound of wood splintering. The heavy oak door, the one Malik had sanded and stained himself 40 years ago, gave way under the force of a battering ram. Boots thundered into the hallway. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps. Shouting. Flashlights sweeping the dark corners. Clear left, clear right. They poured into the dining room. 6 of them. Tactical gear. Weapons drawn. I threw my hands up my knees, hitting the floor with a thud. Don't shoot. Don't shoot. I am unarmed. Get on the ground. Face down. Hands behind your back. 2 agents were on me instantly. One drove a knee into my back, forcing the air from my lungs in a sharp grunt. My face was pressed into the hardwood floor right next to a pile of Monopoly money. Bradley James, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement, an agent shouted, reciting the charges with practiced speed. You have the right to remain silent. Nia stood against the wall, shaking violently. She wasn't arrested, but she was cornered. An officer approached her, less aggressive but firm. Ma'am, step away from the suspect. My father, Nia screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the empty spot where Malik used to sit. Where is my father? This is his house. He will tell you this is a mistake. The officer looked at her, then at the clipboard he was holding. Are you Nia Thompson? Yes, I am his daughter. Call him, he is traveling. He can fix this. The officer shook his head. Ma'am, we received a digital packet from Mr. Malik Thompson this morning at 800 hours. It contained a full dossier on your husband's illegal activities. Your father isn't fixing this. He is the one who reported it. Nia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The betrayal was total. Malik hadn't just left us. He had handed us over. Another officer, a woman in a uniform, stepped forward holding a piece of paper. It wasn't an arrest warrant. It was a document with the seal of the Veterans Housing Alliance. "Ma'am, are you a resident of this property?" "Yes, I grew up here. This is my house." According to the county recorder, the title of this property was transferred yesterday to the Veterans Housing Alliance, the officer said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "We have a writ of possession here. The new owners have requested immediate vacancy. You are trespassing on private property." "Trespassing," Naya shrieked. "This is my childhood home." "Not anymore," the officer said. "You have 5 minutes to gather your personal effects and vacate the premises. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property." Nia looked around the room. She looked at the silver she had packed, the boxes of valuables she had intended to sell. "I can't leave. I have nowhere to go. My son needs a home." "You should have thought of that before you tried to defraud a senior citizen," the officer muttered, low enough that only Nia could hear. Meanwhile, they were hauling me to my feet. I looked wrecked. My expensive suit was covered in dust from the floor. My hair was wild. There was snot running from my nose. I looked at Nia, my eyes pleading. "Naya, call the lawyer. Call the guy your dad uses. Get me out of this." Nia looked at me. She looked at the man who had promised her the world, the man who had convinced her that her father was a burden, the man who had spent her retirement fund on a mistress. She looked at the photo of the blonde woman lying on the table. "Call him yourself," she whispered. "Let's go," the agent shouted, shoving me toward the broken front door. I struggled, twisting in the cuffs. Malik, you old bastard. You can't do this. I will kill you. I will find you, and I will kill you." My threats faded as they dragged me out into the daylight, into the view of the gathering crowd of neighbors. Mrs. Gable from across the street was watching. Mr. Henderson was filming with his phone. I, the man who thought I was better than this neighborhood, was being paraded through it in chains. Nia was left standing in the ruins of the dining room. The officer checked her watch. 4 minutes, ma'am." Nia scrambled. She didn't grab the silver. She didn't grab the art. She grabbed her purse. She grabbed her coat. She grabbed the picture of Leo from her wallet. She ran out the door, stumbling past the broken jamb. She stood on the lawn, shivering in the morning air, watching as they shoved me into the back of a black SUV. She looked back at the house. The front door hung open, broken and gaping like a wound. Inside, she could see the empty walls, the bare floors, and the cardboard box that had held her inheritance. She realized then that she wasn't just homeless. She was an orphan. She had orphaned herself by choice, trading a father who loved her for a husband who used her. The officer placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, you need to leave the property. Now." Naya took a step back onto the public sidewalk. She watched as a crew from the Veterans Housing Alliance pulled up in a van, ready to board up the windows and change the locks. She reached for her phone to call Malik again, out of habit, out of desperation. Then she remembered. Disconnected. She sank down onto the curb, put her head in her hands, and for the first time in her life she truly screamed. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling glass of my penthouse in the Minato district of Tokyo, creating a shimmering curtain that blurred the neon glow of the city below. In the distance, the Tokyo Tower stood like a beacon of orange steel piercing the gray sky, a structure I had admired for decades, not just for its engineering, but for its resilience. I stood there wrapped in a silk robe that cost more than the car Brad drove, sipping a cup of sencha tea that had been harvested by monks in Kyoto. The silence here was different from the silence in my house in America. That silence had been heavy, filled with the ghosts of a marriage and the tension of a family falling apart. The silence here was clean. It was the silence of altitude, of money, of absolute and total privacy. For 10 years, this apartment had been my sanctuary. I bought it under a shell company shortly after Etta died, using the dividends from the Asian markets I had quietly cornered. My family thought I was grieving in a fishing cabin in Michigan during my annual trips. They never knew I was here sitting on Italian leather sofas, surrounded by original art, designing buildings for clients who respected my name. They thought I was a dusty old man counting pennies. They did not know I was a titan in exile. I turned away from the window and walked across the room. The floor was heated marble, smooth and warm against my bare feet. I approached the sleek black desk that dominated the center of the room. It was a minimalist masterpiece, devoid of clutter, quite the opposite of the mahogany desk in my old study, which had been piled high with fake bills and old blueprints. On this desk sat only a single laptop, its aluminum casing glowing softly in the dim light. I sat down in the ergonomic chair, feeling the leather conform to my back. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive cedar and rain. It was time. I opened the laptop. The screen flared to life. I did not check my email. I did not check the stock market. I opened a secure application connected to the server I had installed in the old house years ago. The feed loaded. The image was crisp and clear, broadcast in high definition from a camera hidden inside the porch light fixture. It was morning back in the States. The sun was shining on the street where I had taught Nia to ride a bike, but the scene on the screen was not a happy memory. It was an autopsy of a family. I watched as the black SUV carrying Brad pulled away, followed by the squad cars. The sirens were fading, leaving behind a stunned silence on the neighborhood street. The neighbors were still out on their lawns, their phones raised, recording the spectacle. And there in the center of the frame stood Nia. She looked so small. The camera angle looked down on her, making her appear like a child lost in a supermarket. She was standing on the sidewalk just outside the property line. Her expensive coat was buttoned wrong. Her hair was a mess. At her feet sat 3 designer suitcases that she had frantically packed in the 5 minutes the police had given her. She was not screaming anymore. She was staring at the house. The front door was broken, hanging off its hinges, a dark mouth gaping open. Through the windows, I could see the movement of the crew from the Veterans Housing Alliance. They worked fast. Clarence had given them strict instructions. Secure the asset immediately. I watched as a man in a blue work shirt stepped out onto the porch. He carried a sheet of plywood and a cordless drill. He did not look at Nia. He placed the wood over the broken doorframe and began to drive screws into the jamb. The sound of the drill was not audible through the feed, but I could imagine it, a sharp mechanical whirring that signaled the final sealing of the tomb. Nia flinched with every movement of the workman's arm. She took a step forward, raising her hand as if to stop him, but then she stopped. She realized she had no power here. She had no key. She had no deed. She had no father to hide behind. She pulled her phone from her pocket. I saw her thumb tapping the screen frantically. I knew who she was calling. She was calling me. My burner phone, the one she was trying to reach, was sitting at the bottom of a trash can in the international terminal at O'Hare. She was calling a ghost. I watched her shoulders shake. I zoomed in on the feed. She was crying. It was the ugly, raw crying of someone who has hit rock bottom and realizes there is no floor. She sank down onto one of her suitcases, burying her face in her hands. A part of me, the part that was still her father, wanted to reach through the screen. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to wire the money to a lawyer. I wanted to call the police and tell them it was a misunderstanding. That instinct was deep carved into my DNA by 30 years of parenthood. But then I remembered Leo. I remembered her face on the video call, holding my grandson hostage, threatening to erase me from his life if I did not pay for her husband's crimes. I remembered her eating my gumbo and telling me I was a burden who deserved to be locked away. I did not laugh. There was no joy in this victory. It was a necessary amputation, but it still hurt to lose the limb. I let out a long, slow sigh. It was a sound of release, of letting go of a weight I had carried for too long. "Goodbye, Nia," I whispered to the empty room. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, cutting off the image of my weeping daughter. I did not need to see any more. I knew how the story ended. She would have to find a job. She would have to learn to survive. It would be the hardest lesson of her life, but it was the only one that might save her. I stood up and walked away from the desk. I needed air. I walked to the far side of the penthouse and slid open the glass door leading to the terrace. The wind whipped at my robe, carrying the moisture of the storm. I stepped out into the garden. It was a rooftop oasis, a traditional Japanese garden transplanted into the sky. There were manicured pine trees, stone lanterns, and a path of river rocks that wound through patches of moss. In the center was a koi pond, the water dark and still disturbed only by the gentle drops of rain. I walked along the stone path, feeling the cold seep into my feet. It felt real. It felt grounding. I stopped by the edge of the pond and looked down. The orange and white fish glided beneath the surface, silent and graceful, indifferent to the chaos of the human world. I looked up at the sky. The clouds were breaking, revealing a sliver of moon. I was alone in a foreign country. I had no family left. My son-in-law was in prison. My daughter was homeless. My grandson was caught in the middle. It was a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. But as I stood there breathing in the wet city air, I felt a strange sensation blooming in my chest. It was peace. For the first time in years, I did not have to look over my shoulder. I did not have to worry about who was stealing from me. I did not have to pretend to be less than I was to make others feel comfortable. I was Malik Thompson. I was free. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and continued to walk through the garden. Tomorrow, I would call Clarence. I would tell him to liquidate the Florida land. I would tell him to start the scholarship fund for young black architects. I would start building something new, something that would last longer than a house or a bank account. My life was not over. It was just beginning. And this time, I would build it on a foundation that no one could ever tear down. 3 weeks later, and 5,000 miles away from my peace in Tokyo, my daughter Nia sat on the edge of a stained mattress in a roadside motel on the outskirts of Chicago. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and despair, a sharp contrast to the lavender-scented linens she was used to. Her designer suitcases were stacked in the corner, but they were lighter now. She had visited 3 pawn shops in 2 days. The diamond earrings Etta had left her were gone. The Cartier watch Brad had bought her with stolen money was gone. Even her collection of vintage handbags was gone, sold for pennies on the dollar to a man behind bulletproof glass who didn't care about her sob story. She was down to her last $3,000. It was enough to pay for rent and food for a few months if she was careful. But Nia was not trying to survive. She was trying to win. She checked her phone. It was a cheap prepaid model because her service had been cut off days ago. It was 2:58 p.m. At exactly 3:00 p.m., a heavy knock rattled the thin door. Nia jumped, smoothing down her wrinkled skirt. She opened the door to find a man standing in the humid hallway. He was short, thick-set, and wore a suit that had seen better decades. His name was Mr. Vance, a private investigator she had found in the back of a phone book because the reputable firms had refused to take her case without a retainer she couldn't afford. "Did you find him?" Nia asked, her voice tight with a mixture of hope and desperation. Is he okay?" Vance pushed past her into the room without waiting for an invitation. He threw a thick manila folder onto the wobbly table and collapsed into the single armchair, the springs groaning under his weight. He looked at Nia with an expression that was hard to read. It wasn't pity, it was closer to disbelief. "I found him," Vance said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "It wasn't easy. The man covers his tracks better than a ghost, but everyone leaves a paper trail if you know where to look." Nia sat opposite him, her hands trembling. "Where is he? Is he confused? Did he get lost at the airport? The police said he boarded a plane, but they wouldn't tell me where. I need to know if he is safe. I need to bring him home so I can take care of him." Vance laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. "Take care of him? Lady, you have got this all wrong. Your father doesn't need taking care of. He is not senile, he is not lost, and he is definitely not confused." He tapped the folder with a thick finger. "Your father is in Tokyo. He owns a penthouse in the Minato district. I pulled the property records. He bought it 10 years ago through a shell company. Cash." Tokyo, Nia whispered. "Why would he go to Tokyo? He hates sushi. He barely leaves the neighborhood." Vance shook his head. "You really do not know who your father is, do you? He is a retired draftsman," Nia said, defensive now. "He worked for a firm downtown for 40 years. He drew lines on paper." Vance opened the folder. He pulled out a stack of Architectural Digest magazines, some dating back 30 years. He spread them out on the table. On the covers were buildings that defined skylines. The Helix Tower in Chicago, the Serenity Spire in Dubai, the Glass Bridge in Shanghai. He pointed to a small credit line in the corner of a blueprint photo. "Lead structural consultant M. Thompson." "Your father isn't a draftsman," Vance said. "He is the architect. That is what they call him in the industry. He was the silent partner in 3 of the biggest firms in the world. He fixed the problems the famous guys couldn't solve. He holds patents on earthquake proofing that are used in every major city on the Pacific Rim." Nia stared at the magazines. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the photos of the buildings, gleaming steel and glass structures that touched the clouds. "But we lived in a 4-bedroom house," Nia stammered. "He drove a 10-year-old sedan. He clipped coupons for tuna." Vance leaned forward. "Because he wanted to, or maybe because he didn't want you to turn out exactly the way you did." He pulled out a financial summary sheet. It was an estimate, but Vance was good at his job. "I ran a deep dive on his assets," Vance said. "Based on his patent royalties and his real estate holdings, your father is worth conservatively $15 million. The silence in the motel room was absolute. The sound of the highway outside faded away. The smell of the smoke disappeared. $15 million. Nia repeated the number. She didn't scream it. She whispered it like a prayer. $15 million. Her face changed. The worry for her father's safety evaporated instantly. The confusion vanished. In their place, a dark, hungry realization bloomed in her eyes. He has $15 million, she said, her voice hardening. And he let Brad go to jail over $600,000. He let me get evicted. He let his grandson lose his home. She stood up and began to pace the small room, her heels digging into the cheap carpet. He lied to me, she hissed. My whole life, he lied to me. He pretended to be poor. He made me work for everything. He made me take out student loans. He watched us struggle. He watched us drown. And he sat on a mountain of gold and did nothing. Vance watched her, his eyes narrowing. He gave you a house lady. He paid your bills for years. From what I can see, he gave you plenty. He gave me crumbs, Nia screamed, spinning around. Crumbs. If I had known he had that kind of money, Brad wouldn't have had to steal. We could have lived the life we deserved. That money belongs to the family. It belongs to me. She grabbed the folder, clutching it to her chest. He is senile, she said suddenly, her eyes wide and manic. He has to be. No sane father would do this to his daughter. He is hoarding it. He is paranoid. He ran away to Japan because he is losing his mind, and he took my inheritance with him. Vance stood up, looking at her with disgust. He looked pretty sane in the surveillance photos I got from my contact in Tokyo. He was drinking tea and reading a book. He is sick, Nia insisted. And I am his next of kin. I have to save him. I have to save him from himself. She looked at Vance. How much to find his exact address? How much to help me bring him back? Vance shook his head. I am done. I found him. That was the job. I am not getting involved in a kidnapping or whatever it is you are planning. You are on your own. He walked to the door. You still owe me $500 for the expenses, he said. Nia didn't even look at him. She reached into her purse and threw a wad of cash on the table. Get out, she said. Vance took the money and left, closing the door behind him. Nia was alone again. But she wasn't desperate anymore. She was furious. And she was motivated. She looked at the magazines on the table. $15 million. It was enough to fix everything. It was enough to get Brad out of jail. It was enough to buy a life where she never had to work again. She sat down on the bed and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number for a lawyer she had seen on a late-night commercial. A lawyer who advertised that he fought for the rights of the family. She waited for the line to connect her fingers, tracing the outline of the Helix Tower on the magazine cover. Hello, she said, when a receptionist answered. I need to speak to an attorney immediately. I want to file for emergency guardianship. My father has been kidnapped by a cult in Japan. He is mentally incompetent, and he has stolen $15 million of family assets. She paused, listening. Yes, I can pay, she said, her eyes cold and dead. Once we get him back, I can pay for everything. She hung up the phone. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the dresser. She didn't see a monster. She saw a victim finally claiming what was hers. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't know that the contact Vance had used in Tokyo was actually Clarence and that I had fed him the information. I wanted her to know. I wanted her to know exactly what she had thrown away. I wanted to see if the truth would humble her. Instead, it had weaponized her. So be it. I thought, watching the feed from the hidden camera Vance had left behind in the room, a parting gift paid for by me. Come and get me, Nia. Come and try. Desperation has a distinct smell. It smells like stale coffee, cheap cologne, and the ozone tang of a predatory loan office. From my monitor in Tokyo, I watched the digital footprint of my daughter Nia as she made the worst financial decision of her life. She did not go to a bank. No bank would touch her with a credit score that had cratered into the double digits. Instead, she went to a strip mall in the bad part of Chicago, to a place with neon signs promising cash in 24 hours. She signed a promissory note backed by an inheritance she did not have at an interest rate that would make a mobster blush. She borrowed $50,000. It was enough to hire Leonard Smalls, a lawyer whose billboards littered the highway exits, promising to fight for the little guy. Nia was not the little guy. She was a shark that had lost its teeth trying to buy a new set of jaws. She filed the motion on a Tuesday. Emergency petition for guardianship. The document was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that I, Malik Thompson, had suffered a sudden and catastrophic mental decline. It alleged that I had been lured to Japan by a cult or a scam ring. It claimed that I had emptied the family accounts in a fit of paranoia and that I was currently wandering the streets of Tokyo, confused and vulnerable. It painted Nia as the devoted, heartbroken daughter who only wanted to bring her poor father home to the safety of a facility where he could be cared for. She believed her own lie. That was the most terrifying part. She had convinced herself that the $15 million was hers by divine right and that my refusal to give it to her was proof of insanity. In her mind, a sane father exists only to serve his children. Therefore, a father who protects himself must be crazy. The court date was set for Friday. It was an emergency hearing. I was not subpoenaed because, according to Nia, I could not be found. She expected to walk into that courtroom, cry a few tears, and walk out with a court order giving her total control over my assets, my location, and my life. She expected a rubber stamp. She did not know that Clarence Wright had alerts set up on every docket in the county with my name on it. The day of the hearing arrived. I sat in my penthouse sipping tea, watching the sunset over the Tokyo skyline while halfway around the world the sun was rising on Nia's final gamble. I could not see the courtroom, but Clarence had promised to fill in the details later. I could imagine it perfectly. The courtroom would smell of floor wax and anxiety. Nia would be wearing her most modest outfit, trying to look like a grieving saint. Beside her, Leonard Smalls would be sweating in a polyester suit, shuffling papers that contained nothing but fabrications. The Honorable Judge Miller presided. He was a fair man, but he was overworked. He saw dozens of these cases a week. Elderly parents losing their grip, children stepping in. It was a routine tragedy. He had no reason to suspect that this particular tragedy was a heist. Mr. Smalls stood up. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming with theatrical concern. "We are here today to save a life. My client, Ms. Nia Thompson, is living a nightmare. Her father, a respected member of the community, has suffered a complete psychotic break. He has liquidated his assets, abandoned his home, and fled the country. We believe he is being held against his will or is under the influence of bad actors. We are asking the court to grant immediate temporary guardianship so that Ms. Thompson can freeze the remaining assets and coordinate with the State Department to bring her father home for medical treatment." Nia sniffled on cue. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I just want my dad back." "Your Honor," she whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I just want him to be safe. He is not himself. He would never leave me. He would never leave his grandson." Judge Miller looked at the empty table where the defendant I was supposed to be sitting. It was a powerful image. The empty chair suggested flight. It suggested guilt. It suggested absence. "Is there anyone here to represent Mr. Thompson?" the judge asked, looking at the empty chair. Mr. Smalls smirked. "We served notice at his last known address, Your Honor. The house is empty. He has vanished. We believe he is unable to respond due to his condition." The judge nodded, reaching for his gavel, ready to sign the order that would turn me into a prisoner of my own daughter. And then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. They did not bang open. They swung open with a heavy, dignified weight. Clarence Wright walked in. He was 82 years old. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who has carried history on his shoulders. He wore a three-piece suit that was older than Leonard Smalls and infinitely more expensive. He carried nothing but a single battered leather briefcase. He did not look at Nia. He did not look at Smalls. He walked down the center aisle, the tapping of his cane echoing in the silent room. "I am here to represent Mr. Malik Thompson," Clarence said, his voice like grinding stones. Smalls sputtered. "Objection. Who is this? We have no record of counsel. Mr. Thompson is incompetent. He cannot hire a lawyer." Clarence stopped at the defense table. He placed his briefcase on the wood. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, my name is Clarence Wright. I have represented Mr. Thompson for 40 years. I have a notarized power of attorney signed 3 weeks ago when my client was of sound mind and body. And I am here to tell you that Mr. Thompson is not missing. He is not insane. And he is certainly not in need of his daughter's guardianship." Nia stood up, her face flushing red. "He is lying. My father is sick. He ran away." Clarence looked at her then. He looked at her with the same cold disappointment I had felt at the dinner table. "Sit down, Nia," he said softly. Judge Miller leaned forward. "Mr. Wright, you say your client is competent. Do you have proof?" "The plaintiff has submitted affidavits claiming he was acting erratically and paranoid." Clarence clicked the latches of his briefcase. The sound was like 2 pistol shots in the quiet room. "I do not just have proof, Your Honor," Clarence said, lifting the lid. "I have a receipt." He pulled out a laptop and a stack of documents. "My client did not flee," Clarence continued. "He retired. He relocated to a residence he has owned for a decade. And as for his mental state, I have a video affidavit recorded yesterday in Tokyo. But more importantly, Your Honor, I have evidence regarding the true motivation behind this petition." Smalls tried to intervene. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. It is the truth." Clarence roared, his voice suddenly filling the room with the power of the pulpit. "And the truth is an ambush only to liars." Clarence handed a thumb drive to the bailiff. "Play it," he said. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was not the video from Tokyo. It was the video from my kitchen. It was the recording I had made on my phone the morning I left. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the image of Brad and Nia appeared. The audio was crystal clear. "We make him really lose his mind," Brad's voice said from the speakers. "We switch his medications. We hide his things." And then Nia's voice. "It is perfect. Once he is committed, we will have access to all his accounts. We can sell the house, collect his pension." The color drained from Nia's face. She looked like she was going to vomit. Smalls was frantically shoving papers into his briefcase, realizing he had just walked into a malpractice suit. Clarence stopped the video. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a petition for guardianship. This is a confession of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and kidnapping. Ms. Thompson does not want to save her father. She wants to incarcerate him so she can rob him." Judge Miller looked at Nia. His expression was terrifying. It was the look of a man who realizes his court has been used as a weapon. "Ms. Thompson," the judge said, his voice dangerously low, "is that your voice on the recording?" Nia did not answer. She couldn't. She was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. The judge slammed his gavel down. "Petition denied with prejudice." "Mr. Wright, I assume you will be filing a countersuit." "We already have," Clarence said calmly, pulling another document from the magic briefcase. "We are also filing a formal complaint with the district attorney regarding the attempted fraud." Nia let out a wail, a sound of pure despair. She looked at Clarence. "Please, Mr. Wright. I did not mean it. It was Brad. Brad made me do it." Clarence ignored her. He closed his briefcase. He turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving her alone with the judge, the bailiff, and the ruin of her life. From my screen in Tokyo, I closed the window. I poured another cup of tea. The legal warfare was over. The enemy had been routed, but the war was not done. There was still one loose end, one final lesson to be taught. Brad was still in jail waiting for bail. Nia was now legally branded an abuser, but they still had not learned. They still thought this was about money. I needed to show them it was about soul, and they were about to find out they didn't have one. The large LCD screen mounted on the wall of the courtroom flickered to life with a hum that seemed to vibrate through the heavy silence of the room. Clarence stood by the defense table, his hand resting lightly on his laptop like a conductor waiting to unleash a symphony of destruction. He did not look at Nia. He did not look at her lawyer, Leonard Smalls, who was currently wiping sweat from his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. Clarence looked only at Judge Miller, ensuring that the man who held the power of law was paying absolute attention. I watched from my screen in Tokyo, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. This was the moment. This was the autopsy of my relationship with my daughter, performed live in high definition. The video began. It was grainy at first, the timestamp in the corner reading 3 weeks prior. It was the kitchen of my house, the house I had built, the house I had given away. The angle was wide, capturing the entire room from the hidden camera I had installed in the smoke detector. Brad walked into the frame holding a beer. He looked agitated, pacing back and forth. Nia was sitting at the table, counting bills from her wallet. "We cannot wait for him to die naturally," Brad said, his voice booming through the courtroom speakers, clear and distorted by malice. "The old man is too healthy. He eats his vegetables. He walks every day. He is going to live to be 100, and by then we will be in prison." Nia looked up from her counting. Her face was not the face of a loving daughter. It was the face of a conspirator, I know, she said. "I talked to the doctor again. He will not sign the competency papers without an exam. Dad is too sharp. He remembers everything." "Then we make him forget." Brad snapped, slamming his beer down. We mess with his pills. We gaslight him. We move his things around. We make him think he is losing it. Once he starts doubting himself, he will sign anything. We get power of attorney and we dump him in that state facility on 8th Street, the one with the mold problem. Who cares? He won't know the difference once the meds kick in. In the courtroom, a collective gasp swept through the gallery. The stenographer stopped typing, her hand flying to her mouth. Judge Miller leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into slits. But the video continued. It cut to a different day. Nia was on the phone pacing the living room. "I do not care if he is my father," she was screaming into the receiver. "He is a burden. He is a stingy, selfish old man who is sitting on a gold mine while his family suffers. I deserve that house. I deserve that money. I put up with him for 30 years. I listened to his boring stories. I ate his terrible cooking. I earned this. If he has to spend his last years drooling in a wheelchair so I can have a life, then so be it. He owes me." The audio was crisp. Every hateful syllable hung in the air like toxic smoke. Nia in the courtroom let out a strangled cry. "That is not true," she shrieked, jumping up from her chair. "That is edited. That is a deep fake. He is using AI to frame me." "Sit down." Judge Miller barked, his voice like a thunderclap. His gavel struck the wood block with a violence that made everyone jump. "Counsel, control your client or I will have her removed." Smalls pulled Nia back down, his face pale. He knew right then that his career might be over for even bringing this case to court. Clarence let the video run. It showed Brad laughing about how easy it would be to sell my tools. It showed Nia complaining that I hadn't died of a heart attack yet. It showed the banality of their evil, the casual way they discussed dismantling a human life over coffee and toast. Then the screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It was a silence filled with disgust. It was the silence of people who have just looked into a sewer and realized they are standing in it. Clarence closed his laptop with a soft click. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "The defense rests." Judge Miller slowly took off his reading glasses. He placed them on the bench. He rubbed the bridge of his nose as if trying to massage away the headache that the video had undoubtedly caused. He looked at Nia. He looked at her, not as a plaintiff, not as a grieving daughter, but as something he had scraped off his shoe. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years. The judge began, his voice low and dangerous. "I have seen thieves. I have seen murderers. I have seen people do terrible things to each other for money. But rarely, Mrs. Thompson, have I seen such a naked display of avarice and cruelty directed at a parent." Nia was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Tears of terror, not remorse. "Your Honor, please, you do not understand. We were desperate. We were in debt. Debt is a financial state." Judge Miller interrupted, his voice rising. "It is not a license to conspire to kidnap and chemically lobotomize your father. You came into my court today asking for guardianship. You asked me to give you legal control over the man you plan to destroy. You lied in your affidavits. You lied to your counsel. You lied to this court." He picked up a pen and began to write furiously on the docket. "The petition for emergency guardianship is denied with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Wright's motion for a permanent restraining order. You are to have no contact with Mr. Malik Thompson. You are not to come within 500 feet of him, his property, or his associates." "But there is more," Judge Miller said, looking up again, his eyes blazing. "Based on the video evidence presented in this courtroom, evidence which clearly depicts a conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud, I am holding you in contempt of court." Nia let out a sob, clutching the table for support. And Judge Miller continued, "I am referring this matter immediately to the district attorney's office. I am recommending that they open a criminal investigation into you and your husband for conspiracy to commit assault, fraud, and elder endangerment." "Mr. Bailiff, take Mrs. Thompson into custody." "No," Nia screamed. "No, please. I did not do anything. It was just talk. We never did it. We never did it because he escaped." The judge roared. "You are not innocent because you failed. You are guilty because you tried." Two bailiffs moved toward the plaintiff's table. Smalls stepped away from her, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout. Nia looked around the room, searching for an ally, searching for sympathy. She found none. The gallery looked at her with cold revulsion. Even the court reporter looked away. Nia collapsed. Her legs simply gave out and she slid to the floor in a heap of cheap fabric and expensive ambition. She sobbed loudly, ugly, guttural sounds echoing off the high ceiling. "Daddy," she wailed. "Daddy, help me. Please, Daddy, I am sorry." I watched from Tokyo. I watched my daughter, the little girl I had taught to ride a bike, the woman I had walked down the aisle, dissolve into a puddle of consequences. I saw the bailiffs lift her up by her arms. I saw them drag her toward the door that led to the holding cells. I saw the panic in her eyes, the realization that her life as she knew it was over. I did not feel joy. I did not feel triumph. I felt a deep, hollow sadness. A tragedy is not a victory just because you survive it. Clarence began to pack up his briefcase. He moved with the same slow dignity he had entered with. He did not look at Nia as she was dragged away. He looked at the camera in the back of the room, the one he knew I was watching through. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was done. The legal warfare was over. The shield of the law had been turned into a sword and it had cut the cancer out. Judge Miller banged his gavel one last time, dismissing the court. The sound was final. I closed the laptop screen in my penthouse. The room was dark now, lit only by the city lights outside. I sat in the silence, listening to the rain. Nia was going to jail. Brad was already there. My grandson Leo was with his paternal grandmother, a good woman who had no part in this. I would make sure he was taken care of. I would set up a trust that neither of his parents could touch. But for now, I was alone. I stood up and walked to the window. The city of Tokyo sprawled out before me, a tapestry of light and motion. I was thousands of miles away from the courtroom, thousands of miles away from the wreckage of my family. I placed my hand against the glass. It was cold. "You wanted the money, Nia," I whispered to the reflection in the window. "You wanted the inheritance. Well, you got it. You inherited the wind." I turned away from the window and walked into the kitchen to make tea. Tomorrow I would have to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. But tonight I would sleep. For the first time in years, I would sleep without fear. The high-definition feed from the courtroom was replaced by a grainy, low-resolution audio file sent to my secure server by Clarence 3 days later. It was a recording from the Cook County Department of Corrections. The file name was simply Inmate Bradley James Call Log. I sat in my Tokyo penthouse, the city lights reflecting off the black glass of my desk, and pressed play. I needed to hear the end. I needed to hear the moment the parasite realized it had killed its host. The audio began with the robotic announcement of the prison system. "This call is from a federal correctional facility and may be monitored and recorded." Then came the sound of heavy breathing. It was a wet, ragged sound. Brad was not doing well inside. Clarence's contact in the warden's office had sent a report along with the audio. Brad had lasted less than 6 hours in general population before his mouth wrote a check his fists couldn't cash. He had tried to order a cellmate to move his bunk. The result was a fractured orbital bone, 2 broken ribs, and a lip that was split like a ripe tomato. The Wolf of Wall Street had become the sheep of Cell Block D. Nia picked up on the first ring. Her voice was small, trembling, and exhausted. "Brad, is that you? Oh God, are you okay? I have been calling the lawyer, but nobody will take my calls." She sounded like a woman holding onto a lifeline. She still believed. She still thought they were a team fighting against the world, fighting against the cruel father who had abandoned them. She expected comfort. She expected a plan. What she got was venom. "Shut up," Nia Brad hissed, his voice distorted by his swollen mouth. "Stop crying and listen to me. You need to get me out of here. Now. This place is a hellhole." "They took my shoes, Nia. They took my damn shoes." "Brad, I am trying," Nia sobbed. "I went to the bail bondsman. They want 10% of the bond. The judge set it at $500,000 because of the flight risk. I need $50,000, Brad. I do not have it." Dad froze everything. "The accounts are empty. They even took the car. I do not care how you get it." Brad screamed, the audio peaking with the force of his rage. "Sell something. Sell your jewelry. Sell the silver you packed." "I tried," Nia wailed. "The police took the silver as evidence of theft. And the jewelry." "The jewelry was fake, Brad," the pawnshop guy told me. "The diamond earrings you bought me for our anniversary, they were cubic zirconia. You lied to me." There was a silence on the line. A heavy, suffocating silence. I could practically hear the gears grinding in Brad's desperate mind. He had been caught in yet another lie, but he didn't care. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to explain. He just pivoted. So what if they were fake, he spat. I was investing the real money. I was trying to build an empire and you were too stupid to notice. Look, forget the jewelry. Go to your friends. Go to those rich sorority sisters you are always bragging about. Beg them. I can't, Nia whispered. They saw the live stream. They saw the news. No one will talk to me. I am a pariah, Brad. I am sleeping on a mattress in a shelter because the landlord evicted us an hour after the arrest. I have nothing. You have a body, Brad said. The words hung in the air, static and cold. What did you say? Nia asked, her voice barely audible. You heard me, Brad growled. You have a body. You are a pretty woman, Nia. There are men out there who pay for that. High-end escorts make $5,000 a night. You could have the bail money in 10 days if you worked hard enough. I sat in my chair in Tokyo and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had known Brad was a bad man. I had known he was a thief and a liar, but I had not realized the depths of his depravity. He was suggesting, he was demanding that his wife, my daughter, sell herself to strangers to buy his freedom. Brad, Nia choked out the horror seeping through the speakers. You cannot be serious. You are my husband. Husband. Brad laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. I am a man in a cage, Nia. Survival is the only thing that matters. If you do not want to spread your legs, then find another way. You have 2 kidneys, don't you? You only need one. There is a guy in this block who says he knows a broker in the city. They pay $30,000 for a healthy kidney. Do it. No, Nia screamed. No. You are insane. I am insane, Brad roared. I am the only one thinking clearly. You owe me this, Nia. You owe me. I wasted 5 years of my life on you. 5 years listening to you whine about your daddy issues. 5 years pretending to care about your boring life. And for what? For nothing. Nia was silent. The sobbing had stopped, replaced by the shock of absolute clarity. You pretended, she whispered. Of course I pretended, Brad sneered. Look in the mirror, Nia. You are average, you are boring, you have no ambition. Why do you think a guy like me married a girl like you? It wasn't for your conversation. It was for the house. It was for the inheritance. It was because you told me your daddy was old and alone and sitting on a gold mine. He paused, catching his breath, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I made an investment, Nia. You were just the acquisition cost. I thought the old man would kick the bucket and I would cash out. But he didn't die. He just kept living and living like a cockroach. And now, because he outsmarted us, because you were too weak to make him sign the papers earlier, I am sitting in a cell smelling another man's sweat. So do not talk to me about being a husband. The contract is void, Nia. The deal is off. Now get me my money, or I swear to God when I get out I will finish what we started on the mountain, but I won't miss this time. The line went dead. The recording ended. I sat in the silence of my office. I looked out at the lights of Tokyo blinking like millions of indifferent eyes. That was it. The autopsy was complete. The cause of death for my daughter's marriage was not financial stress or legal trouble. It was the fact that it had never been alive to begin with. She had been a mark. A long con, and she had sacrificed her father, her son, and her dignity for a man who saw her as nothing more than a waiting room for a payday. I opened a new window on my laptop. I pulled up the surveillance feed from the shelter where Nia was staying. I had hired a new investigator to keep tabs on her, not to help her, but to ensure she stayed away from Leo. The camera showed the common room of the women's shelter. Nia was sitting on a folding chair, her phone in her lap. She wasn't moving. She was staring at the wall. Her face was a mask of devastation. The illusion was gone. The narrative she had told herself that she and Brad were partners against the world, that they were Romeo and Juliet persecuted by a cruel father, had been incinerated by the truth. She was not a partner. She was a pawn, and the king had just sacrificed her to save himself. She looked down at her hands. She took off her wedding ring. It was a simple band, the diamond having been pawned days ago. She looked at it for a long time. Then she stood up and walked to the trash can in the corner of the room. She dropped the ring into the garbage. She walked back to her chair and sat down. She put her head in her hands. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She was in the hollow place that comes after the end of the world. I watched her for a minute longer. I felt a pang of pity, but I pushed it down. Pain is a teacher, and Nia was finally in school. I closed the laptop. Brad would rot in prison. The recording of that call urging his wife to commit illegal acts and threatening violence would be forwarded to the district attorney by Clarence within the hour. It would add another 10 years to his sentence. He would never hurt anyone again. And Nia was on her own. She had hit the bottom. Now she had to decide if she was going to stay there or if she was going to climb. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The moon was out. I am Malik Thompson. I had destroyed my enemies. I had saved my legacy. But looking at my broken daughter alone in a shelter, I knew that victory has a taste, and it tastes like ashes. 6 months is a long time when you are living it minute by minute in a hell of your own making. For my daughter Nia, time had ceased to be measured in social calendar events or shopping trips. It was now measured in the stack of dirty plates that never seemed to end. She was working the dinner shift at a diner 3 towns over from where she used to live. It was the kind of place where the grease hangs in the air like a fog and the customers leave quarters instead of dollars. I knew this because I still had eyes on her. My investigator sent me weekly reports. They were grim reading. Nia was living in a basement apartment she rented from a woman who owned 6 cats. She slept on a futon. She took the bus. Her designer clothes had been sold to pay for a lawyer who had eventually fired her when the money ran out. Her hands, the hands that used to get $50 manicures every week, were now red and chapped from hot water and industrial soap. One Tuesday evening after a particularly brutal shift, Nia sat down at the wobbly table in her rented room. She opened her laptop, which was one of the few possessions she had managed to keep. She connected to the neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi signal and opened her email. She typed for hours. She deleted and retyped. She cried. I know she cried because the investigator mentioned she had been seen buying tissue in bulk. Finally, at 2 a.m, she hit send. The email arrived in my secure inbox a few seconds later. The subject line was simply Daddy. I read it. Daddy. It began. I do not know if you will ever see this. I do not know where you are. But I hope you are safe. I am writing this because I need you to know that I am sorry, not because I want money, not because I want you to fix this, but because I finally understand what you did. She went on to describe her life. She told me about the blisters on her feet. She told me about the hunger. She told me about the shame of running into an old high school friend while she was scraping leftovers into a trash can and pretending she did not hear her name. I realized today she wrote what you meant about value. I spent my whole life thinking I was special because of what we had or what I thought we had. I thought I was better than the people who served me. Now I am the one serving, and I realize I was never special. I was just lucky. And I threw that luck away because I was greedy. She talked about Brad. She told me she hated him. She told me she hated herself for listening to him. I miss you, Daddy, she continued. I miss the smell of your pipe tobacco. I miss the way you used to hum when you were cooking gumbo. I miss feeling safe. I am so scared all the time now. I know I lost the right to be your daughter. I know I lost the right to ask for anything. But please just know that I am paying for my sins. Every single day, I pay for them. If you ever can find it in your heart to forgive me, I will be here waiting. I love you. Nia. It was a good letter. It was well written. It hit all the emotional notes. It was the letter of a prodigal child coming home broken and humble. But I was not in the mood for parables. I was sitting at a small round table outside a cafe in the Marais district of Paris. The morning air was crisp smelling of rain and fresh croissants. I had a cup of espresso in front of me and a copy of Le Monde, which I was learning to read slowly. I was wearing a scarf Etta had bought me 30 years ago. I felt young. I felt light. I read Nia's email again. I looked for the lie. I looked for the angle. And I found it. It was subtle, but it was there. I am so scared all the time now, she had written. She wasn't writing because she missed me. She was writing because she was afraid. She was writing because the reality of the world was crushing her, and she wanted the safety net back. She wanted the father who fixed things. She wanted the architect to design a way out of her basement apartment. She blamed Brad. She blamed her youth. She blamed her ignorance. But she never once took full ownership of the malice. She never admitted that she had looked me in the eye and threatened to take my grandson away. She never admitted that she had viewed me as a carcass to be harvested. She was sorry she was suffering. She was not sorry for what she had done to me. There is a difference. I took a sip of my espresso. It was bitter and hot. I did not feel a pull in my chest. I did not feel the urge to pick up the phone and call her. I did not feel the need to rescue her. That part of me, the father who sacrificed everything, was dead. He had died in that kitchen when she told him he was a burden. I tapped the screen of my tablet. I selected the email. I hit forward. I typed in Clarence's secure address. For the file Clarence, I wrote, "Do not reply. Do not acknowledge receipt. Just log it as contact from a hostile party." Then I hit delete. The email vanished from my inbox. It vanished from my life. I put the tablet down and looked out at the street. A young woman walked by holding the hand of a little boy. He was about Leo's age. He was laughing, pointing at a dog in a window. Leo. My grandson was the only innocent party in this war. He was living with his other grandmother now, a good woman with a small house and a big heart. But she didn't have money. She didn't have the means to give him the future he deserved. I could not let Naya get her hands on him. I could not let her poison him with her entitlement or use him as a pawn again, but I could not leave him with nothing. I picked up the tablet again. I opened a new secure message to Clarence. "Clarence," I typed, "it is time to execute the final trust document, the Leo Fund." I laid out the terms. They were strict, they were ironclad. I was funding a trust with $2 million. It would pay for Leo's education at any university in the world. It would pay for his medical care. It would pay for his housing. But there were conditions. Condition 1, no funds are to be released until Leo turns 25 years old. He needs to learn to work first. He needs to learn the value of $1 before he gets 2 million of them. Condition 2, the trust is to be administered by a blind third-party executor. Neither Nia nor Brad nor any agent acting on their behalf is to have knowledge of the trust's existence or access to its funds. If Nia attempts to access the money or uses the promise of the money to secure loans, the trust is to be immediately dissolved and the funds donated to the Veterans Housing Alliance. Condition 3, Leo is to be told about the trust on his 18th birthday. He is to be given a letter from me explaining everything, explaining why I left, explaining why his mother is not allowed to touch a dime. I read over the instructions. It was cold, it was harsh, but it was necessary. I was building a wall around my grandson's future, a wall that his mother could not climb. I hit send. It was done. I had protected the future while severing the past. I signaled the waiter for the check. I paid in cash, leaving a generous tip. I stood up and adjusted my coat. The Paris wind was picking up, blowing leaves across the cobblestones. I thought about Nia scrubbing dishes in that diner. I thought about her walking home in the rain to a basement full of cats. I thought about her waiting for a reply that would never come, checking her email every 5 minutes, hoping that Daddy would come and save her. She would wait a long time. I was not coming. I was not saving her. I had given her the greatest gift a parent can give a child who refuses to grow up. I had given her consequences. I turned my back on the cafe and walked down the street, merging into the crowd of Parisians. I had a ticket to the opera tonight. I had a meeting with a young architect tomorrow who wanted to show me his designs for a sustainable housing project in Senegal. I had a life, and for the first time in 40 years, it was entirely my own. I sat across from Henri in a small bistro near the Seine, watching the river cut through the heart of Paris like a vein of liquid silver. Henri was 80 years old, a retired structural engineer who had fled the Jim Crow South in the 60s to find dignity in Europe. He was one of the few men alive who knew me when I was just a young man with a sketchbook and a chip on my shoulder. He knew about the buildings I had ghostwritten. He knew about the patents. He knew about the silence I had kept for 40 years. "You look different," Malik Henri said, sipping a glass of deep red Bordeaux. "You look like a man who has finally put down a heavy suitcase he carried for too long." I nodded, slicing into a piece of crusty bread. "I feel lighter, Henri. For decades I thought my legacy was my blood. I thought my duty was to pass the torch to the next generation. I thought that if I sacrificed enough, if I absorbed enough pain, my daughter would grow up to be strong. I thought I could buy her character with my silence." Henri laughed, a dry, rasping sound that signaled a lifetime of hard-earned wisdom. "We all make that mistake, my friend. We think our children are extensions of ourselves. We think we can mold them like clay. But they are not clay. They are seeds. And sometimes, no matter how much you water them, no matter how good the soil is, the seed is just bad, or maybe the wind just blew it in the wrong direction." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "You did not fail her, Malik. She failed herself. You gave her a foundation. She chose to build a shack on it instead of a cathedral. That is not on you. I looked out at the people walking along the riverbank. Couples holding hands, students reading books, old men feeding birds. They were all living their lives oblivious to the drama that had consumed mine. I realized something today, I said. I realized that family is not a suicide pact. It is not a mandate to let someone drain you dry just because they share your DNA. I cut off a limb to save the body, Henri, and I do not regret it. Henri raised his glass in a toast. To the body, then, and to the life that remains. We finished our meal in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between old friends who have nothing left to prove. When the check came, I paid it. I did not check the balance. I did not worry about the cost. Come with me, I said, standing up. I want to show you something. We walked through the winding streets of the district, the autumn leaves crunching under our boots. We walked until the old buildings of Paris gave way to a modern plaza, a space of open air and light. In the center of the plaza stood a building. It was not a skyscraper. It was a cultural center, a library and art gallery that I had designed 20 years ago under a pseudonym. It was a sweeping curve of glass and steel designed to catch the light at every hour of the day. It looked like a bird in flight frozen in silver and blue. I stood in front of it looking up at the facade. I saw the lines I had drawn on drafting paper in my study back in the States. I saw the calculations I had made late at night while Etta slept. I saw my soul made concrete. People were walking in and out of the doors, students with backpacks, researchers with briefcases, children running to the storytelling hour. They were using the space. They were learning. They were growing. They were safe inside the walls I had imagined. This, Henri said, quietly standing beside me. This is it, isn't it? Yes, I whispered. For years I told myself that Nia was my masterpiece. I told myself that raising a black woman in America who was safe and provided for was the greatest thing I could do. But I was wrong. Nia was not a masterpiece. She was a tragedy of entitlement. This building, this structure that served thousands of people I would never meet, this was my masterpiece. This was my legacy. It did not ask me for money. It did not lie to me. It did not try to put me in a home. It simply stood. It stood strong against the wind and the rain and the passage of time. It gave shelter. It gave knowledge. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was a new phone, one I had bought in Tokyo, but it was linked to the old life. It was the only tether left. I looked at the screen. There were no notifications, no emails from Nia, no updates from the lawyers. Silence. I thought about the plot of land I still owned in Florida. It was a prime piece of real estate beachfront, untouched. I had been saving it. I had thought maybe one day Nia would build a vacation home there. I dialed Clarence's number. Clarence, I said when he answered. Malik, everything is quiet on this end. Nia is, well, she is surviving. Brad is awaiting trial. Good, I said. I am calling about the Florida land. You want to sell it? Clarence asked. No, I said. I want to donate it. All of it. Transfer the deed to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Tell them to turn it into a park. A public park. Name it the Etta Thompson Memorial Gardens. Make it free for everyone. There was a pause on the line. That is a multi-million-dollar donation, Malik. It is dirt, Clarence, I said, looking at my building. It is just dirt until you do something good with it. Make it happen. Consider it done, Clarence said. And Malik, yes, live well, my friend. You earned it. I hung up. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was a sleek piece of technology, a miracle of engineering. But in that moment, it felt like a shackle. It felt like a leash that could tug me back to the pain, back to the disappointment, back to the basement apartment where my daughter was paying for her sins. I did not want to know anymore. I did not want the updates. I did not want the spy reports. I did not want to know if she climbed out of the hole or if she stayed there. I had given her the lesson. The rest was up to her. I pressed the power button and held it down. The screen went black. I walked over to a trash bin near the entrance of the library. I dropped the phone inside. It hit the bottom with a dull thud. I turned back to Henri. Ready? He asked. Ready, I said. We walked away from the building, away from the past. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. The air was cold, but I did not feel it. I felt warm. I felt whole. I am Malik Thompson. I am 70 years old. I have no children to speak of. I have no home in the country of my birth. I have no debts. I walked into the Parisian twilight, a man without a tether, a man without a burden. They say you cannot take it with you when you die. That is true. But what they do not tell you is that you do not have to give it to the people who hate you while you are alive. You can give it to the world. you can give it to yourself. I took a deep breath of the city air. It tasted like freedom, and for the first time in my life, I was not building for anyone else. I was just living. And that was the greatest design of all. We often spend our lives believing that family is a permanent bond that requires endless sacrifice regardless of how we are treated. But Malik's journey teaches us a brutal yet necessary truth. Blood does not grant a license to abuse. True family is defined by mutual respect, loyalty, and genuine love, not by DNA or inheritance. By walking away, Malik didn't just save his fortune, he reclaimed his dignity. He showed us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for toxic people is to let them face the consequences of their own actions, even if it breaks your heart to do it. You are never too old to start over, and you are never required to set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. If you agree that respect is earned and not inherited, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. Let me know in the comments. Would you have left the box for Nia, or would you have just disappeared without a word?